Hey guys, tonight we are doing something unwise. You're going to step into the brittle, snow-blanketed world of a Viking winter. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Seriously, this is not Skyrim. There are no magic potions, no fast travel buttons, no cozy inns with fire-breathing bards. Just real cold, real hunger, and very real people doing their best not to freeze to death in a world where February might as well be an ancient Norse word for good luck, idiot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps me keep making these weird bedtime stories for you. And tell me, what city are you listening from? What time is it right now? Midnight in Minneapolis? 2 a.m. in Berlin? I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first snow falls in early October, not a flurry, not some light dusting, but thick wet flakes that slap it against your face and melt down the back of your neck. You're standing in the middle of a Viking village, Scandinavia, maybe the western fjords of Norway. There's a heavy scent of wood smoke in the air, and something fishy. A lot of things are fishy here, but this is literal. Dried cod maybe, salted herring. It's not gourmet, but it's survival. The buildings around you are longhouses, low to the ground, their roofs thatched with sod and moss. These people know what's coming. You, however, are wildly underdressed in your modern cotton hoodie, which is now soaking wet and freezing against your skin. Your boots crunch through a thin layer of icy mud. A skinny dog watches you from behind a woodpile, its ribs showing through its fur, tail twitching. It doesn't bark, it's not sure if you're friend or food, people are busy, and by busy I mean they are desperately trying to prepare for a season that kills half of them. Firewood is being chopped and hauled, nets are being mended and hung to dry under the eaves, sheep are being herded into the longhouses. Yes, into them. You're going to be living cheek to jowl with animals for the next few months, and not in a cute little house on the prairie kind of way, more like you wake up with a goat chewing on your hair kind of way. The sun, which was already shy, now sets at around 4 p.m, and the shadows are long and blue. No one wastes daylight. You meet a woman stirring a thick pot over a fire. Barley porridge with what looks like bits of dried meat and turnips. She offers you a bowl with a look that says she'll regret it later. You take a bite. It's warm, but flavourless, like eating sadness. Still, your stomach growls with thanks. You find yourself taken in by a family, a widow with 2 sons and a daughter who all eye you with equal parts suspicion and pity. They assume you're just another wayward soul displaced by raiding or famine or worse. You try to explain you're not from here, but they just nod and hand you a rough wool tunic and a pair of boots that definitely belong to someone who's no longer alive. You don't ask questions. That night, as the cold truly sets in, you huddle on a bed of straw inside the longhouse. It's dark. Not just lights off dark. It's the only light comes from a sputtering oil lamp that smells like boiled whale dark. The air is thick with smoke from the central hearth, which doesn't have a chimney. Just a hole in the roof that lets out some of the smoke and lets in a lot of cold. Your eyes water, your throat burns. You cough and try to sleep through the sounds of pigs shifting around in the corner and someone snoring like they're chewing gravel. You learn quickly that privacy doesn't exist here. You wake up to the cold snout of a sheep against your cheek and the widow's daughter elbowing you because it's your turn to feed the fire. You crawl out of your blanket cocoon into a room that's just barely above freezing. Outside, the snow is deeper now. The dog is gone, probably found something to eat. Or was something to eat. One thing becomes terrifyingly clear: winter isn't just a season here, it's a siege, and you're already inside the walls. Historically speaking, you're probably somewhere around the late 800s or early 900s. Vikings are at their cultural peak, but peak doesn't mean comfortable. They've got their trade networks, sure, silver from the east, spices from the south, but you're not on a longship or in a bustling port, you're out in the sticks, where winter hits hardest, and there are no imports of cinnamon or fancy textiles, just survival. Here's your historical fact for the night. In many Viking communities, winter was so brutal that people prepared all year just to make it through 5 or 6 frozen months. They dried fish, cured meat, pickled vegetables, and salted everything short of their own children. A good winter was one where fewer than 30% of the livestock died. Now for something a little off the historical radar. Some archaeologists believe that Vikings used fermented urine to start fires in extreme cold, It sounds absurd, but powdered touchwood soaked in urine becomes highly flammable. And hey, when it's 20 degrees CC and your fire goes out, you'll try anything, including pea tinder. And now the scholarly debate. There's some uncertainty about how egalitarian Viking survival really was. Romanticised sagas make it sound like a tight-knit society where everyone pulled their weight, but some historians argue that class and gender roles meant wealthier Vikings hoarded resources, while poorer families starved quietly. Even in the sagas, entire households are written off when food gets low. Would your hosts choose you or their sheep come February? Back in the longhouse, the wind howls outside like a living thing. You wrap your arms around yourself and try to imagine spring. The widow ladles out a second helping of porridge. Someone must have died to make that possible. You don't ask, you just eat. You wake up with your face pressed into straw that smells faintly of mildew and goat. Your back aches from the uneven floor, and your toes feel like frozen sausages, numb, stiff, and slightly horrifying. The fires burn down to a faint orange glow, barely enough to keep frost from creeping across the inside of the walls. You sit up shivering under your borrowed wool tunic, and look around. Everyone else is still sleeping, bundled together like sacks of potatoes, snoring, farting, and occasionally twitching like dream-haunted dogs. The widow stirs first. She moves with quiet efficiency, feeding the fire, adding kindling from the precious stack in the corner, and setting up a pot of morning gruel. She doesn't say a word, just nods at you as you try, and fail to stretch the crick out of your neck. The air inside the longhouse is slightly warmer than outside, but only just. It's still cold enough that your breath fogs in the air. You watch it drift upwards toward the hole in the roof where the sky is already that miserable winter shade of off-white. Another snowy day, obviously. You think of how back home you'd have just clicked a thermostat. Central heating, hot water on demand, maybe a heated blanket. Here, the heat comes from fire, animals, body heat, and fat, usually in the form of a dripping tallow candle that doubles as a light source and triples as a source of nose-wrinkling stink. If you're lucky, you'll score some bear fat, which burns a bit cleaner. If you're unlucky, it's seal oil. And let's just say, once that scent gets into your clothes, your hair, your very pores, you're basically wearing eau de dead seal for the rest of the season. Later that morning, you try to help. You gather firewood, trudging through snowdrifts that swallow your calves. The axe they hand you is older than you are, chipped and wrapped with worn leather, but it works. You split logs until your hands blister and your breath comes in ragged clouds. The cold doesn't just nip at you, it consumes you. It finds the gaps in your sleeves, the thinness in your socks, the inch of skin between your glove and coat. There's no escaping it, only bargaining with it. Inside, the longhouse fills with smoke and conversation. The family is debating whether the fermented hay from the lower barn is ready to be used as animal bedding or still too damp. This is the kind of thrilling winter discourse you get when there's no Wi-Fi and you're snowed in with your livestock. The daughter, whose name you've learned is Astrid, catches you sniffing the inside of your sleeve and makes a face. "Oh, you smell like lamp oil and fear," she says in thickly accented English, and you both laugh, sort of. Here's your historical reality check for the day. Viking longhouses weren't heated evenly. The hearth in the centre provided warmth and cooking space, but there the heat didn't spread far. Most of the longhouse stayed cold and the upper sleeping platforms were barely warmer than the outside air. People wore layers upon layers, slept in groups, and stayed bundled even indoors. Clothes weren't changed daily, maybe not even weekly. Wool held warmth even when damp, but it also trapped odours, which is why everyone smells a little like smoked meat and week-old socks. Oh, and another thing, there were no chimneys. That smoke you've been choking on? Normal. It blackened the beams, coated the lungs, and shortened lives. Some theories suggest that low-level smoke inhalation actually kept certain airborne illnesses down. Others argue it just slowly poisoned everyone. Either way, you're coughing constantly, your throat is raw, and your eyes sting. Welcome to clean living, so 10th century style. Now for your quirky side fact. Viking women often chewed resin from birch bark, not just to clean their teeth, which were reportedly in decent shape, but also to freshen breath and keep hunger at bay. Think of it like prehistoric chewing gum. Tree-flavoured and bitter, but kind of useful when food is scarce and your mouth tastes like wood smoke and sheep sweat. There's a debate among historians about just how homey these longhouses really were. Some romantic depictions show them as warm, bustling places filled with laughter, music, and togetherness. Others lean hard in the opposite direction. Dark, smoke-choked, claustrophobic boxes where diseases spread and tempers flared. Reality was probably somewhere in the middle, depending on how many people were packed in and how bad the weather got. But from your current, very cold, very congested vantage point, it definitely feels more like the second. At night, the wind rises again. It howls through the gaps in the timbers, rattles the rough wooden shutters, and carries with it the fine icy snow that manages to sneak inside. Someone swears as a draft hits their side of the room, and you find yourself holding your breath, listening. The fire cracks softly. A pig lets out a deep grunt. Someone coughs again. That might have been you. You can't stop thinking about the insulation, or lack thereof. The walls are timber, with moss stuffed into the seams. There's no insulation as you know it. The floor is dirt, literally dirt. Packed, frozen earth that sucks heat from your body like a vampire. You keep your boots on while you sleep now, everyone does. You also try not to think about what's on that dirt. With livestock indoors, clean is a relative term. Let's just say you step carefully. Later in the week, there's a minor crisis. The oil lamp runs out, and the only available substitute is a lump of rancid bear fat from last year's hunt. It smokes thickly and smells like an armpit set on fire. You gag. Astrid laughs. She says this is nothing. Last winter they had to burn old leather and pine tar for light. That smell took until spring to fade. Still, there are strange comforts here. The family has rhythm. Everyone knows their role. The youngest boy churns milk into butter, though the butter has frozen into a solid lump and requires heating before you can even spread it. The eldest son is building a trap for rabbits, which involves a loop of twine, a bent branch, and an unsettling amount of patience. And the widow hums while she sews, making repairs on wool mittens that seem more patch than original cloth. In this way, life continues. Not easily, not comfortably, but it continues. The cold remains, always pressing in, always humming just outside the walls. Like it's waiting. The cold isn't just something you feel anymore, it's something you hear. It has a sound, a particular stillness. Like the earth holding its breath. Snow doesn't fall in gentle flakes, it slams down in sheets, tapping at the wooden roof with little fingers made of ice. Outside, the wind shrieks like it's got a personal vendetta against your ears. And stepping beyond the doorframe, that's not going outside. That's entering a war zone made entirely of frozen air and regret. The first time you try to leave the longhouse after a storm, you learn what Viking cold really means. You think you've bundled well, 3 wool tunics, 2 pairs of socks, mittens that look like they were sheared straight from a sheep and slapped together by someone with no depth perception. But the moment you step outside, it feels like something invisible punches the breath out of your lungs. The air is so cold it burns. Your nose hairs freeze instantly. You feel them crunch when you inhale. It's deeply upsetting. Everything is white. Snowbanks as tall as men line the sides of the path, which isn't really a path anymore, just a slightly less lethal direction to walk in. The trees in the distance are frosted over, looking more like bones than branches, and the skies are thick, sullen grey. No birds, no movement, just the sound of your own boots creaking in the snow and the occasional snap of a frozen twig underfoot. You're not even doing anything exciting, just going to fetch water from the stream which, by the way, is frozen over. The eldest son, Leifur, has to show you how to use an iron spike to break through the ice, then scoop slushy water out into a bucket that's already starting to freeze solid before you even get back. Your eyelashes have actual icicles on them. It's all very charming in a please end me now kind of way. Back inside you realise your face has gone numb in patches. You rub your cheeks, and the skin feels like someone else's. You're lucky. Leif tells you about a man from another village who lost his nose last winter after getting caught in a storm without proper coverings. His nose. They keep it simple around here. Don't go out unless you absolutely have to. And even then, make peace with your gods first. Here's your historical tidbit of the evening. In the Viking world, frostbite was just part of the equation. It wasn't named exactly, they didn't have a fancy medical term, but they knew it, feared it, and saw it as one of the many ways winter could take a piece of you without warning. They would wrap extremities in furs, wear wool layered over wool, and sleep close to the fire whenever they could. But even then, toes, fingers, noses, all negotiable in the great deal with winter. And now for the weird stuff. Viking-age mittens have been found preserved in peat bogs, and some of them were single-fingered. Like oven mitts. Not for fashion, just sheer survival. Separate fingers get cold faster, so keeping them together helped retain heat. You two are now the proud wearer of what you're pretty sure is a repurposed squirrel pelt stitched into something knit adjacent. Your fingers still go numb, but now they smell slightly nutty. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how much time Vikings actually spent outdoors during winter. Some argue they were a hardy, snow-conquering people who regularly braved the elements for hunting, scouting and trade. Others suggest that, once winter truly hit, most travel and outdoor work stopped unless absolutely necessary. The idea of daily chores happening in a blizzard might be more modern myth than historical fact. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. Some people definitely went out, and some people definitely died doing it. The widow doesn't mince words. She tells you directly. If the cold takes you, it is not personal, it just is. Which sounds very zen. Until you realise she's basically telling you that nature doesn't care about your survival. So keep moving, keep covered, and never ever fall asleep outside. The longhouse begins to feel more like a lifeboat adrift in an ocean of ice. You learn to gauge time by how long the fire has been burning, or by the aching in your joints. You're not sick yet, but your fingers tingle and your lips are cracked like old leather. Water is never quite enough. You drink it some, but it vanishes into your skin like it's trying to put out a fire under your flesh, and you always feel tired. Even when you sleep, it's not restful. It's like your body is spending all its energy just not dying. Astrid teases you for shivering constantly. She claims you make more noise trying to keep warm than the pigs. She teaches you how to breathe slowly and deeply, how to wrap your scarf tight over your mouth so your breath warms your nose. She even gives you a chunk of resin to chew. Birch. Again. It's awful, but your jaw works harder, and that helps generate a bit of heat. You thank her. She shrugs. You'll freeze slower now, she says, which is somehow the most optimistic thing anyone's said to you all week. One night the wind gets so strong that the longhouse actually shifts. Just a creak, timbers flexing, roof groaning, but enough to wake you up in a panic. You sit up, heart pounding. You expect someone else to be awake, maybe concerned, but no. They all sleep through it. Or pretend to. You're not sure which is worse, and still the cold goes on. It's no longer something outside. It's in your bones, your breath, your thoughts. You start dreaming of heat. Not fire or blankets, but sunlight. That simple feeling of a warm breeze on your face. You'd give anything to feel it again. But in this world, that's a memory from another life. Here, there's only the fire, the snow, and the silence between. Hunger sneaks in quietly at first. Doesn't show up with a dramatic stomach growl or some cartoonish need to raid the pantry. No, hunger here is subtle, sly, and patient. It waits for the cold to do its part, for your body to burn through what little fat reserves it had. Then it tightens its grip little by little, day by day. It starts with smaller portions. The widow stirs the same porridge pot with a slightly more thoughtful glance. No one says anything, but you notice the bowls are a little less full than they were last week. A few turnips are gone from the root cellar. One morning there's no butter. Astrid just shrugs and says, "Out, out." Then she adds, "For now," like that makes it better. Doesn't. You're hungry again an hour after breakfast. Not just peckish, your body is screaming for more fuel. That porridge is nothing but watery barley and a whisper of dried meat. The taste doesn't matter anymore. You'd eat actual shoe leather if someone boiled it long enough, which, spoiler alert, they eventually will. By midday your hands are shaking slightly as you carry in more firewood. Not from the cold, not this time from the emptiness. It's a strange sensation, like your muscles are operating on memory instead of energy. You push forward because what else are you going to do? Sit and wait to starve. Here's the historical bit. Food scarcity during Viking winters was not just a possibility, it was a given. These people planned their entire year around maybe having enough food to last until spring. They salted fish, dried meats, smoked everything they could, and buried vegetables deep in the earth or root cellars, hoping the frost wouldn't take them. And even with all that, many still ran out. Famine wasn't a fluke, it was an expected visitor. You're not in a famine yet, but you feel it approaching like a dark cloud you can't outrun. The family doesn't talk about it. But the way the widow checks the storage pit, how often she's counting turnips in her head, tells you everything. You've become extra math, an extra mouth, a variable she didn't plan for. You're not sure how that's going to end for you. There's a strange meal one evening. The stew tastes different. It's meat, definitely, but not pork, not beef, and certainly not fish. You don't ask, nobody offers. You eat quietly, avoiding everyone's eyes. Later, Astrid lets it slip. One of the chickens died unexpectedly. They figured it was better to eat it than waste it. It was getting old anyway, she says, as if that makes it less unsettling. You suddenly remember seeing 3 chickens last week. You only see one now. You're burning calories just staying warm. Even asleep, your body's working overtime to not freeze solid. So hunger never leaves. It crouches in your belly like a wolf, gnawing at your insides. The worst part? You start to dream about food. Rich, vivid dreams. Roasted meat, thick bread dripping with butter, ripe berries, and something called cheesecake that you're not even sure you like that much in real life. But now you'd commit several minor crimes for a bite. Astrid catches you sniffing the cooking pot one day like it might give off some residual calories. She offers you a piece of dried fish. It's more bone than flesh, and so salty it stings your tongue. Still, you gnaw on it like a dog with a chew toy, trying to convince yourself it's satisfying. It's not. Here's your quirky historical fact. Vikings preserved their food with an impressive array of early culinary chemistry. They used salt, ash, even honey to preserve meat and fish. But they also made a delicacy called harkal, fermented shark. And by delicacy, we mean putrefied and buried for months until it becomes edible-ish. The ammonia content is so high it burns the throat going down. Consider yourself lucky the widow doesn't have any of that lying around. Yet. There's an academic argument over how widespread starvation really was. Some scholars suggest that only the poorest communities truly faced famine each winter, while wealthier households had enough reserves and slaves to weather the worst. Others point out that even rich farms had bad years, and trade routes froze up, and sometimes entire villages just didn't make it. Skeletons found in some Norse graves show signs of malnutrition, especially in the children. It wasn't just a bad winter, it was every winter that chipped away at them. By mid-month, rationing becomes more obvious. Meals are served with a hard look and measured ladles. The younger boy starts chewing on bits of leather cord when he thinks no one's looking. You catch yourself doing the same thing, tasting a strap from your boot just to feel something in your mouth. It doesn't help, but it distracts you from the aching void where your appetite used to be. The animals are thinner too. The pigs are fed less, the cow's milk is getting watery. You don't talk about what happens when the feed runs out, but everyone knows. You help fix a broken storage shelf in the cellar. It's so cold down there your breath turns to ice crystals on the wooden beams. There's still a sack of barley, a few smoked sausages hanging like dried fruit, and some sour milk in a clay jug that's starting to separate. The widow seals the lid tight again and mutters, "Spring is still far." You nod like you understand, but you don't. Not really, not yet. You go to sleep that night with a hollow stomach and a growing sense of dread to Simar. You used to be able to push the hunger aside, but now it follows you everywhere, into your dreams, into your bones, into the quiet spaces between the crackles of firewood. You'd trade your last pair of socks for a piece of bread. And you still have months to go. You've been here long enough now to know what's for dinner before the pot even hits the fire. The dried fish, usually cod or something cod adjacent, is pulled from a bundle of stiff curled slabs hanging near the roof like ancient jerky shingles. Each piece is like wood, brittle and pale, smelling faintly of low tide and regret. They don't even rehydrate it much anymore. It just goes into the pot with a few shaved onions and maybe, if the widow's feeling generous, a lump of turnip the size of your thumbnail. Everything is boiled until it no longer resists chewing, and then it's ladled out with grim efficiency. Tonight's stew tastes like ocean and sadness. You eat it anyway because the alternative is starving. You even lick the inside of the bowl, which no one comments on anymore. Hunger has killed shame. They've all done it. You sit near the fire afterward, holding the wooden bowl in your lap like a warm stone. The smoke drifts up toward the smoke hole in the roof, swirling with flecks of soot and the faint, earthy stench of boiled root vegetables. There's no conversation. The family just sits, digesting and surviving. Even Astrid, usually quick with a jab or a snarky to smirk, is quiet tonight. Her eyes flick toward the window shutter. Snow again. Always snow. Here's your historical insight for the evening. Vikings survived on a surprisingly diverse diet in theory. In warmer months they had berries, grains, dairy, fish, game, and some cultivated vegetables. But winter collapsed that buffet into a much more miserable menu. Most people lived off what they could preserve. Stockfish, that's your dinner, sour milk and flatbreads that could crack teeth if you weren't careful. The bread, often called flatbro, could be stored for months. Sometimes it was flavoured with seaweed, Because nothing says culinary adventure like kelp loaf. You help wash the bowls in near-freezing water from a bucket beside the door. Your hands go numb instantly. Not figuratively, literally. You can't feel your fingers after 15 seconds, and when you do manage to flex them again, it's like stabbing yourself with frozen needles. Leaf notices and tosses you a scrap of fur. You wrap your hands and shove them under your arms, teeth clenched. Trying not to scream, he nods, approving. Pain means you still feel something, he says. Great, that's reassuring. There's a fringe fact you probably didn't ask for. Some Viking households ate fermented trout that had been buried in pits during summer. Not to be gross, but it was intentionally left to rot. Think of it as the ancient precursor to a biological weapon. Called rakfisk, it still exists in some Nordic countries today. It smells like ammonia and dares you to love it. You haven't encountered it here yet, but you're increasingly convinced that if this winter drags on, anything could end up in the stew pot. And we do mean anything. And then there's the scholarly dispute you've probably been subconsciously wondering about. How much of this suffering was typical? Were the Vikings always this cold, always this hungry? Some academics argue that early Viking Age communities were relatively stable and food secure, thanks to trade and seasonal migrations. Others point to evidence of repeated famines, skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition, and abandoned farmsteads as proof that these winters were often fatal. The truth? Probably both. If you were lucky, had a good harvest, and no raiders torched your grain store, you'd make it. If not, well, let's just say the sagas don't always tell the whole story. You spend more time indoors now, partially because of the blizzards, but mostly because the energy to do anything else just isn't there. The cold is bad, sure, but hunger is worse. It makes you slow, dull. Your body starts prioritizing warmth over motion. You start skipping tasks. Leaf notices and glares, but doesn't comment. Astrid offers you her half of the fish skin from dinner once, and you take it without hesitation. It's chewy, rubbery, and somehow both slimy and crispy at once. You love it. You feel disgusting. The days are so short they barely register. You wake up, eat something, work if there's work to be done, and then huddle around the fire as the light fades again. You try to tell stories once, just to pass the time, but your voice is hoarse and the family doesn't seem interested. Their stories are darker, bleaker. Tales of winters past where whole villages starved, where wolves dragged people from doorways, where children disappeared into snowdrifts and were never found. No morals, no redemption, just warnings wrapped in myth. One evening, the widow begins cooking something unfamiliar. It's bitter and sharp-smelling, almost sour. The pot gives off a strange yellow steam. Turns out it's fermented fish head soup, made from scraps that were too unpleasant even for drying. The taste is unspeakable, but the broth is hot, and it coats your throat like a greasy blanket. You drink 2 bowls and keep it down. That's what passes for victory now. You notice everyone has lost weight. Even Leif, who was thick-armed and broad-chested when you arrived, has a hollowness to his face now. Astrid's cheekbones are sharp under her flushed skin. The youngest boy has stopped complaining about being hungry. That might be the most terrifying thing of all. One night you hear something outside, the unmistakable sound of something scratching at the door. Everyone freezes. It's too early in the season for bears, and wolves usually don't come this close to the village. Leif grabs a spear and stands near the door listening. It stops. No one sleeps much that night. The next morning, you find tracks in the snow, not animal. Human, barefoot. Astrid says nothing, just kicks snow over them. You don't ask. You're starting to learn that in Viking winter some questions are just rhetorical screams into the void. The meals get smaller again. Now it's mostly broth with a sliver of meat if someone finds something in the cellar, or under the snow. Once the widow pulls out a jar of congealed animal fat, scrapes a spoonful off the top, and spreads it onto flatbread so thin it cracks in your hand. You eat it like it's a feast. It isn't. But your body sings for that extra bite of fat. It's calories, it's survival. The hunger is no longer just physical, it's mental. You dream about food, yes, but you also start seeing it. A patch of snow becomes a loaf of bread. The smoke from the hearth smells like roasted almonds. Your mind is rebelling. You're hallucinating. You're losing it. And yet you still wake up, still work, and still take your place at the fire, because if you stop to moat, the snow wins. It's hard to explain how long the night lasts when the sun barely shows up. Each day bleeds into the next like ink in snow. By now, the light isn't even light. It's more of a grey smear across the sky that lasts a few sad hours before disappearing behind the hills again. Sunrise and sunset practically shake hands. It's not like the poetic darkness you see in fantasy films either. It's the kind that seeps into your skin and stays there. It makes you sluggish, forgetful, and constantly unsure whether you've slept enough or just never woke up properly. Your body still functions, more or less. You wake up, you eat, if there's anything, and you help with whatever needs doing, but your mind? That's another story. You catch yourself staring into the fire for long stretches, not thinking about anything in particular. Just gone, like you've wandered off somewhere internally, and coming back is getting harder each time. Astrid notices. She doesn't say anything, but she hands you more wood to stack and walks off. It's her way of keeping you tethered. Work, at least, is something to hold on to. The darkness gets to everyone eventually. Leif, always stoic and unshakable, snapped at his little brother yesterday over something as stupid as a dropped cup. The boy cried quietly in the corner for a while, then just went to bed. The widow didn't intervene. No one did. Everyone's fuse is shorter now, and no one has the energy to play peacekeeper. Even Astrid, sharp-tongued and clever, seems dulled. You miss her smirks, you miss laughter in general. The house has gone so quiet it feels like a tomb with heating problems. Here's the historical truth: seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, wasn't something the Vikings had a name for, but they absolutely lived it. Imagine weeks, even months, of darkness and cold, with your only sources of light being a smoky hearth or a tiny oil lamp that stinks up the room. No sun, no stimulation, no real sleep cycles, just monotony, cold, and the constant sound of people trying not to cough too hard. Even now, with light therapy and vitamin D supplements, people struggle. Back then it was just called winter. And here's your strange but true side fact. To combat the effects of the long dark, some Norse communities held specific story nights. Not just for entertainment, but as a kind of psychological survival. Families would sit together and pass down sagas, stories of gods, giants, warriors, and tricksters. But sometimes these tales were less about heroism and more about warning. A ghost in the snow, a stranger who knocks but never speaks, a cursed hunter who eats his own shadow. Sleep well with those bedtime stories echoing in your head. There's academic disagreement over how much these long winters affected mental health. Some scholars argue that communal living and tightly knit families mitigated psychological collapse, that sharing space, food, and stories helped balance things out. Others countered that the opposite could be true, that cramming everyone, animals included, into a small smoky box for months on end could amplify stress, depression, and even provoke violence. Either way, you're experiencing the reality firsthand. Tempers fray, patience runs dry, and silence becomes heavier than snow. You try going outside once, just for a change of scenery. The sky is low, like a lid pressing down on the world. The snow squeaks underfoot, frozen so hard it sounds like styrofoam. The trees are wrapped in rays, and the entire landscape feels frozen in time, like you've stepped into a photograph of a world that gave up. The silence is nearly unbearable. You stand there listening to nothing until your ears begin to ache and your breath crystallizes in your beard. You head back in, not because you want to, but because standing still in this cold is its own kind of death sentence. You've learnt that now. You've seen the way the cold lingers in fingertips and toes, how numbness becomes pain and then nothing at all. You check your shen constantly. Any white patch could mean frostbite. You'd rather not lose a toe over a stroll, and inside the fire is down to embers. No one's tending it. You throw on a few sticks and blow carefully, watching the orange glow flare back to life. It's one of the only things that feels like an accomplishment these days. The fire lives, so you live. That's the math. You notice the youngest boy drawing in the soot along the floorboards. Nothing complex, just circles and lines, over and over again. Astrid sees you watching. It helps him, she says. Keeps him calm. You nod. It makes sense. If you could draw, maybe you'd do the same. But your hands are too stiff, your thoughts too fogged. You just sit beside the hearth, hands stretched toward the flickering heat, letting it remind you that you're still here. One night the widow tells a story. Not a saga, not a heroic ballad, but a quiet, eerie tale about a traveller who gets lost in a snowstorm and stumbles upon a cabin in the woods. He's invited in, warmed by the fire, fed a feast. But he wakes up to find himself in a snowdrift, half buried with no footprints leading away. He never finds the cabin again. Everyone sits still after she finishes. No comments. Just the sound of the fire crackling and the wind pushing against the walls. You're not sure if it's a warning or a comfort. Maybe both. The days keep sliding past like ice on a frozen lake. You lose track of what week it is. The hunger has dulled now, not because you're full, but because your body has adjusted to being perpetually underfed. You still get meals, but they're more ritual than sustenance. A scoop of mush, a ladle of broth, once, a piece of fried skin that you savour like it's a 5-star delicacy. You go to bed with a full heart and an empty stomach. Again, sleep is weird. You drift in and out, more like resting than dreaming. Sometimes you wake up unsure what day it is, or even if it's morning or evening. The dark doesn't tell you, it just waits. But then one day, or maybe night, you see something different. A beam of light slips through the smoke hole. It's pale, faint, and gone almost instantly. But it's there. You blink at it like it's a hallucination. But it's real. The sun, the actual sun, has returned, even if only for a few minutes. You don't cry, but you almost do. That little streak of gold against the dark ceiling is the most beautiful thing you've seen in weeks. Astrid sees it too. She doesn't smile, but she does look you in the eyes and say, "It's not spring, but it's something." You nod, more grateful than you've ever been for a few square inches of sunlight. Hope doesn't roar back all at once. It sneaks in like a spark beneath the ash. Quiet, unsteady, but alive. You're sent out to gather firewood, which sounds simple until you remember it's February in Viking land, and simple tasks involve some level of existential risk. The snow is so high now that the usual paths between the longhouses are tunnelled like trenches in a war zone. The wind whips down them like it's angry you're still alive. But fire doesn't feed itself, and without it, well, neither do you, so you wrap your scarf twice, double-check your squirrel mitten things, and step outside like you're heading into battle. The forest is a short walk from the village, though short becomes a relative term when the wind keeps slapping your face like it owes it money. You have a wooden sled for dragging logs, basically 2 planks lashed together with rope, and an axe that's seen better centuries. The snow is dry and squeaky underfoot, the trees skeletal or chimney, groaning under the weight of snow and time. It's eerily quiet out here, the kind of quiet that feels wrong. You glance back. The village is already out of view, just white, everywhere. The silence isn't just atmospheric, it's isolating. Your breath is loud in your ears, and the cold hums in your bones. It's not a peaceful kind of silence, it's the "you might disappear here and no one would ever know" kind. Still you press on, the trees at least offer some shelter from the wind, and the ground here is littered with fallen branches, dry wood. That's gold. You chop slowly, methodically. Each swing jars your frozen arms, but you're too numb to really care. It's almost meditative, the steady thud, the crisp snap of a log splitting clean. You start to feel like you're part of some ancient rhythm, like your body remembers how to do this, even if your modern brain is still quietly screaming, "Why are we like this?" Let's ground this misery with a fact. Firewood gathering in winter was a daily necessity for Viking households. They didn't have fireplaces as you know them, just central hearths that needed to burn constantly to keep temperatures survivable. If the fire died overnight, everything inside the house, including the people, risked freezing. So the job of hauling wood wasn't glamorous, but it was vital and dangerous. Many froze or injured themselves doing it. You now understand why. A fringe fact to chew on, preferably not literally. Some Norse communities used animal dung, yes, dung, as supplemental fuel during particularly harsh winters. Dried and packed into bricks, it burned slowly and provided just enough heat to make the longhouse less tomb-like. So if firewood ran out, you'd be hauling cow chips instead of logs. Romantic, huh? There's still scholarly back and forth about just how efficient Norse heating systems were. Some argue the design of longhouses, with central hearths and overlapping insulation, made them decently warm by the standards of the time. Others suggest they were basically smoke-filled refrigerators, and only the strong or constantly drunk survived. The truth? Likely both. It depended on how well you prepped your firewood, how airtight your roof was, and how lucky you got with wind direction. Some winters, no amount of architectural planning could save you from a particularly vengeful blizzard. Speaking of which, halfway through your firewood quest, the weather turns. The wind picks up first. Then the light vanishes behind thick, fast-moving clouds. You know what's happening before it fully arrives, a storm. Leaf warned you about it this morning. He said the sky looked mean. You thought he was being dramatic. You were wrong. Snow begins to fall again, not gently but sideways, in sharp, stinging pellets. You lash the last few logs onto the sled and start pulling, but visibility is collapsing around you. The forest, once a haven, now becomes a maze. Every direction looks the same. White trees, white sky, white air. You could scream and not hear your own voice. You try to follow your tracks back, but they're already gone. Erased like chalk in rain. Panic edges into your mind. The cold sinks deeper. Your fingers stop working properly. Your feet feel thick and distant, like they belong to someone else. You've never been this cold in your life, and that's saying something considering what you've already endured. This is the part where modern instincts fail you. You can't call for help, you can't check GPS. You can't even follow smoke because the wind has scattered everything. You drop to your knees behind a fallen tree, shielding yourself from the worst of the storm, trying to think, trying to remember how to stay alive. It's Leif who finds you. He emerges from the white like a ghost, eyes squinting, beard full of frost, wrapped in a bearskin cloak like some frost-bitten demigod. He grabs your arm without a word, hoists you up, and starts dragging the sled back through the storm. You don't talk. There's no point. Your face is too frozen to form words, and anyway, all your thoughts are bouncing between, oh God, I'm going to die out here and I might already be dead. By the time you stagger through the longhouse door, you're not walking. You're more like collapsing in stages. Your legs buckle, your lungs burn, and someone peels your mittens off to reveal their hands the colour of old parchment. The widow curses and shoves your hands into a pot of lukewarm water, which is somehow both a blessing and the worst pain you've ever felt. The blood rushes back slowly, like fire crawling under your skin. You sob silently into your sleeve. Astrid wraps you in every fur they have. She says nothing for a long time, then says softly, "Don't go out alone again, not in a storm." You nod, ashamed and grateful in equal measure. Here's the thing you never thought you'd learn firsthand. Snow is not soft. Not when you're stuck in it. Not when it's grinding into your skin like sandpaper made of ice. Not when it wants you dead, and it does want you dead. Out here, nature doesn't hate you. It doesn't care enough to hate you, but it's relentless. And that's somehow worse. Back by the fire you try to warm up. You hold your hands over the flames, feeling them tingle and pulse with returning life. You realise then that this isn't just about staying warm. It's about staying alert. Every little slip, every late start to a chore, every bit of "I'll just do it later" can be fatal. There's no margin for error. Leif passes you a cup of sour milk. You drink it. It's disgusting. You love it. You're still here. Outside, the storm rages on. But inside the longhouse, the fire crackles. For now. The storm doesn't let up for 3 days. Snow piles high against the longhouse walls, slowly burying the lower windows and turning the entire place into something between a bunker and a tomb. The shutters creak under the weight. At one point, Leif has to climb out through the roof vent with a shovel just to dig a path to the door so it doesn't collapse inward from the pressure. You watch him disappear up into the grey light, flakes swirling in behind him like ghosts slipping through cracks. Inside, it's dim, smoky, and crowded, closer now than ever. Even the animals seem quieter, like they understand something has changed. The piglets huddle in the straw, snuffling in their sleep. The old goat's legs shake when she stands. Everything in the house breathes slow and shallow. Survival mode. Meals during the storm are basically fluid sadness. Thin soups, broths flavoured with dried herbs, and not much else. There's talk of boiling bones next, just to draw out the marrow. You find that idea both horrifying and weirdly exciting. Anything with flavour sounds like luxury. You catch yourself licking the inside of the bowl again. So does Astrid. You both look away. No one mentions it. The food cellar is nearly bare now. You see it with your own eyes. One limp cabbage, a handful of wrinkled carrots, and a bucket of barley that started to sprout white fuzz on one side. The widow slices off the mouldy bits with a sharp knife and cooks the rest. No one argues. You chew the barley slower, more deliberately, pretending it's hearty stew. Here's a grim historical reality check. Food running out in the middle of a Viking winter wasn't unusual. In fact, many farms planned for it. There was a term in Old Norse, svelti, for hunger so regular it had its own vocabulary. When that final leg of winter hit, the goal wasn't to eat well, it was to not die. People boiled old leather, chewed bark, even ground up bones into powder to mix into flour when the real stuff ran out. Anything that could be swallowed was considered fair game. Which brings us to a charming culinary invention you now get to sample. Bark bread? It sounds poetic, right? Rustic. Woodsy. Well, you'd be correct, because it's literally made from trees. Specifically, The inner layer of birch bark, scraped thin, dried, ground, and mixed with whatever flour you have left, which is usually almost none. The result? Something flat, dry, and weirdly bitter, like eating tree-shaped regret. But it fills your stomach. Sort of. There's a scholarly debate about whether bark bread was a common winter staple or a desperate famine fallback. Some evidence points to it being widely accepted across the Norse world, especially in inland areas with fewer trade options. Others argue it was more regional and that wealthier farms never had to touch the stuff. But you're definitely not on a wealthy farm. And tonight's feast has a generous slice of birch bark loaf front and centre. You eat it. You try not to splinter a tooth. Progress. Sleep is restless. Not because of noise, no one talks much anymore, but because your stomach twists with emptiness. It's not hunger pangs anymore. It's something deeper, almost like your body is digesting itself. You curl tighter into the straw, wrapping your fur cloak around you, dreaming of meals that never happened. You wake up more tired than before. Astrid shakes you awake one morning with a serious expression. "We've got to go outside," she says. Snows collapse part of the woodpile. You groan. She raises an eyebrow. "You want to freeze inside?" Point taken. Digging out a snowed-in woodpile is exactly as miserable as it sounds. The cold bites harder now, not just the air, but the wind that sneaks in around your collar and fingers, even through 3 layers of wool. Your boots are stiff, your socks damp. Every shovelful of snow feels heavier than it should be. And somewhere in the back of your mind you realise you're getting weaker. Not dramatically, but slowly, steadily. The kind of weakness that creeps in, one forgotten calorie at a time. You and Astrid work in silence until your hands cramp. She finally flops back into a drift and says, "This isn't the worst winter I've seen." You laugh bitterly. "Then I never want to see that one." She shrugs. 2 years ago, a neighbour family didn't make it past Solmerka. You don't know the word, but her tone tells you enough. When you ask what happened, she just says, "Spring came." They didn't. Later, while warming back by the fire, the widow brings out something you haven't seen before, a bundle of dried lichen. It's been soaking in water for a while and now looks like slimy grey noodles. "We'll add it to the stew," she says. Thickens it. You try not to gag. Lichen soup. It tastes like wet rock and pond water. But it's warm and warm winds. You start to wonder what people are really eating in the longhouse. You've heard whispers about secret stores, a little salt pork here, some hidden nuts there. Leaf keeps a pouch tied under his tunic. The widow watches every ration like it's gold. You don't blame them. In this world, trust is a luxury, even among family. One evening something happens. The widow finds a stash of old grain buried beneath a false panel in the storage pit. Just a small sack. Maybe 2 or 3 meals worth. Everyone gathers around like she's unearthed buried treasure. No one says a word. She scoops a handful, lets the grain spill through her fingers like rain. Then she divides it. Exactly. Evenly. You get your portion, and it's the most beautiful sight you've seen all week. Actual grain. Unspoiled. You eat it boiled into a thick porridge, no salt, no milk, nothing else, and it might as well be a holiday feast. Here's something offbeat but true. Viking celebrated Jul, a midwinter festival that eventually morphed into modern Christmas. It involved feasting, toasting the gods, and burning Yule logs. But if food was scarce, Jol could become a grim parody. An empty table, a symbolic toast, maybe a crumb of dried bread shared among 10. You think about that as you stare at your bowl. This isn't a feast, but it's what you have, and it matters. You go to bed with a slightly heavier stomach. Not full, but content. For once, the gnawing hunger fades to a dull whisper. Your dreams are strange. Something about fresh bread and honey, and a table overflowing with roasted meats, but at least you sleep. Outside, the storm finally ends. The stars come out, faint, flickering, like timid animals sniffing at the edge of a clearing. You step outside just for a moment. The snow glows blue in the moonlight. It's silent, but not dead. Just waiting. Like you. It's only when you've known real hunger that your definition of food begins to expand. With the storm behind you, and the woodpile now salvaged, thank the frost gods for small favours, there's an odd sense of relief hanging in the air. But that feeling doesn't fill your belly. The food's still running low, you're still weak, And now people start getting creative. This morning the widow hands you something round, flat and suspiciously crumbly. "Eat," she says. You glance down. It's greyish, dense and smells faintly like musty books. "What is it?" you ask, holding it like it's possibly cursed. Astrid grins. "Bark bread," she says, "with extra bark." Lovely. You chew. It's like gnawing on tree shavings baked into cardboard and regret. The bitter aftertaste lingers. You chase it with a gulp of sour water from the snowmelt bucket and try not to make a face. Bark bread is common now, too common, and the bark they're using isn't even the good inner layer anymore. It's outer bark. Scraped, boiled, dried and mashed into flour. Basically forest sawdust. You chew it anyway, slowly, mechanically, because what else are you going to do? That brings us to tonight's historical gem. Bark bread, called barkebrød in later Scandinavian history, wasn't just a famine food in Viking times. It reappeared during famines as late as the 1800s. People returned to it again and again, each time hoping not to need it ever again. That's how persistent food scarcity has been in these regions. They carved bread from trees, literally, and sometimes mixed it with animal blood if they were lucky enough to have some to spare. You've tasted worse, honestly, but not by much. Now here's your fringe fact. Some Viking families dried moss, specifically reindeer moss, which isn't actually moss, and ground it into a paste to supplement flour. It's not toxic if boiled, though it tastes like a wet sponge. You've had it twice now. The second time was slightly better, which says more about your emotional decline than the recipe. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about just how much famine food was used in average Viking homes. Some argue it was rare and only relied on during catastrophic winters. Others suggest it was more integrated into regular winter diets than we'd like to believe, especially in isolated regions with poor soil or harsh weather. One theory even proposes that learning how to prepare famine food was a rite of passage for children. As in, welcome to being a grown-up. Here's your bark bread and moss paste. Enjoy the next 6 months. So now you know you're not being fed weird survival food. You're just becoming historically accurate. Midday, Astrid returns from the woods carrying something wrapped in a bit of ragged cloth. Everyone gathers around. She unwraps it slowly. 2 handfuls of red berries, frozen solid, frost clinging to their skins, crowberries maybe, or lingonberries. Hard to tell in this light. Either way, they're a miracle. Everyone gets one. One single berry. You let yours melt on your tongue. It's sour and sharp and tastes like colour, like the memory of summer. It almost makes you cry. Later, the widow brings out a secret stash. Flour. Not much. Just enough for something she calls stone bread. It's unleavened and cooked directly on a flat rock over the fire. No salt. No fat. But it's warm, and as the dough rises just slightly in the heat, the smell fills the longhouse with something dangerously close to happiness. She tears off hunks and passes them around. It's the best thing you've eaten in weeks. Not because it's good, because it reminds you that food used to be normal. And then, one evening, something new happens. You're out back, emptying the night bucket. Don't ask, just imagine a task both disgusting and necessary. When you spot something in the snow. Movement. You freeze. It's low to the ground, snuffling near the woodpile. A rabbit. Small, scrawny, probably half frozen itself, but alive. You drop the bucket, gracefully splashing your boots in filth, and run back to the longhouse. Leif grabs his sling and follows you out. You don't get your hopes up. Rabbits are quick, slippery, and smarter than they look. This one's not. Leif hits it clean in the skull. 1 rock, 1 twitch, done. That night you have meat. Not much. Maybe enough for a ladle's worth per person, but it changes everything. The widow simmers the rabbit with onions and a few crushed berries Astrid saved. The whole room smells like a feast. You chew slowly, reverently. The meat's stringy but rich. It tastes like energy, like hope. Everyone eats in silence, soaking up the broth with crusts of bark bread. It's not just a meal, it's morale. You're still alive, still fighting. Here's something they don't tell you in the sagas. Survival in winter wasn't about great battles or glory, it was about moments. A single rabbit, a spoonful of lichen soup, a bowl of bone broth that made it just a little easier to sleep. Winter didn't kill people with blizzards alone. It killed them with silence, repetition, and slow, creeping nothingness. The kind of slow fade that wears your will down to threads. You go to sleep that night with actual meat in your belly and actual warmth in your chest. You dream of rabbits, thousands of them, hopping into the stew pot voluntarily, lining up like noble sacrifices. You wake up starving again, but less afraid. For now, the days are still short, the sun still barely rises, but there's a shift. You start to notice the light lasting just a bit longer in the evenings. The snow doesn't melt, but it softens slightly during midday. The wind howls a little less often. It's still winter. Still brutal, still hungry, but maybe, just maybe, it's loosening its grip. You don't trust it, but you see it. Astrid does too. She points to the icicles dripping slightly and mutters, "The thaw lies sometimes, don't get soft." You nod. Then you go inside, tear another chunk from your daily ration of bark bread, and pretend it's rabbit. You wake to the sound of coughing, not the usual dry clearing of a throat, but deep, ragged hacking, the kind that sounds like it's trying to scrape something loose from the lungs. It's Leif. He's hunched over near the hearth, clutching a rag to his mouth, and when he pulls it away, you catch a glimpse of something dark on the cloth. Not blood, not yet, but close. No one says anything at first. That's the unspoken rule here. Don't name the illness unless it starts naming you back. You roll over, pretending not to see, but the noise keeps coming, joined by the younger boys wheezing in the corner. The air in the longhouse is thick. Not metaphorically thick, actually thick. The smoke hangs low from last night's fire, clinging to the thatch ceiling in a greasy cloud. You breathe it in, and your chest feels heavy, sluggish. They tell you it's normal, that this is what winter does. No fresh air, no windows, just damp lungs and trapped breaths swirling around day after day. And they're right. Historically speaking, Viking winters weren't just cold, they were breeding grounds for respiratory infections. Pneumonia, bronchitis, even tuberculosis in some regions. Longhouses were cosy only if you were comparing them to a snowbank. Otherwise, they were basically smoke-filled petri dishes. Leif shrugs it off. "Just a cough," he mutters, sipping weak pine needle tea. It smells like sap and disappointment. Astrid rolls her eyes. "If you cough up a lung, can I keep it?" she asks. He smirks, but the sound it makes is half wheezing. The widow doesn't look amused. You spend the morning scrubbing out the water bucket with a chunk of ash and straw. Hygiene here is creative. No soap, no sanitizer, just hot water, ash, vinegar if you're lucky, and elbow grease. You've seen Astrid wipe her knife clean on the hem of her tunic more than once. Germ theory hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, there's no one here to explain it. Here's your curious historical fact of the night. Some Viking households practiced primitive herbal medicine using what they had on hand: juniper berries, angelica root, pine resin, even garlic. Not always effective, but not total quackery either. Some of these had antimicrobial properties, and some of them, like yarrow or mugwort, doubled as fever reducers. Of course, antimicrobial is a big word when your entire toolkit is boil it and hope. There's a bundle of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, collected in summer, now as precious as gold. The widow plucks a few sprigs of thyme and something that might be horehound and brews it into a murky tea. Leif chokes it down without complaint, but you can see him wince. It tastes like boiled grass and old metal. Probably is boiled grass and old metal. Now for your fringe fact. One Norse folk remedy for chest congestion was to breathe steam from a mixture of goat urine and herbs. Supposedly the ammonia helped clear the lungs. You pray you won't be asked to test this particular technique, because you're pretty sure your dignity wouldn't survive it. Meanwhile, the coughing spreads. The boy starts shivering at night. His skin is hot, dry, his lips cracked. The widow mashes a poultice of moss and honey, what's left of it, and presses it against his chest, murmuring an old prayer in Old Norse that sounds like wind scraping against bone. You don't know the words, but the tone is clear. She's scared. That scares you. There's scholarly debate about how widespread medical knowledge actually was among the Vikings. Some argue that every household had a wise woman or healer, often the matriarch, who passed down generations of practical remedies. Others believe medical practices were fragmented, based on superstition and trial and error. Honestly, from where you're sitting, it's both. The widow knows what she's doing, sort of, but also she's guessing. You try to help. You boil water, fetch more snow to melt, clean cloths, you rub the boy's armours to keep his blood moving. You whisper stupid jokes to keep him awake, even though your own throat has started to feel tight and scratchy. You lie to yourself. It's just the smoke, just dryness, just winter. Astrid doesn't look so great either. Her eyes are ringed with purple, her nose red and raw. You offer her your portion of bark bread one night and she doesn't argue. That's how you know it's serious. She leans her head on your shoulder for a moment. Just a moment. Then pulls away, sniffling. You start taking turns sleeping in shifts. Someone always watches the fire now, not just to keep warm, but to watch the boy. His breathing rattles like loose wood in a storm. If he stops, someone needs to be there, just in case, and still the cold presses in. You'd think sickness would make people turn on each other, but oddly it doesn't. Not here, not in this house. There's no panicked isolation, no dramatic arguments about who's infected. They just care. Quietly, fiercely. And maybe that's what keeps them alive in the end. Not just the food, not just the fire, but this stubborn refusal to let go of each other. Here's the most terrifying thing though. There's no medicine. No antibiotics, no backup plan. If the boy gets worse, he dies. If Leif's lungs fill with fluid, he dies. And you're not immune. You came here soft, modern. You're the most vulnerable one in the room. So you do what you can. You drink the bitter teas. You wrap your scarf tight. You keep moving. Because slowing down, lingering in bed, skipping a chore, resting too long by the fire, that's how it starts. One evening, you head outside to clear the snow off the roof. The air is brutally cold, but it feels almost clean after days in the smoky longhouse. You climb up slowly, carefully, brushing off thick layers of snow and ice. Each shovel load crashes to the ground below with a satisfying thud. The stars are sharp above you, frozen pinpricks in a sky so black it feels bottomless. And for a moment, you breathe deep. Cold, yes, but fresh. Alive. You look back down at the longhouse. Smoke rises steadily from the roof vent. Inside, they're coughing, struggling, fighting, but still here. You shovel another pile of snow off the roof and whisper to no one in particular. Stay warm. Then you climb down and go back inside, into the firelight, into the coughing, into the quiet war that is surviving one more Viking night. The first thing you feel in the morning isn't cold or hunger, it's pain, specifically your feet. You try to stretch, but the ache is so sharp and sudden that it startles you fully awake. You sit up in the dim light of the longhouse, clutching at your toes beneath the ragged wool blanket. They're stiff, hard to bend, and when you press on them, there's no feeling in the tips. That's not good. That's very not good. You pull your foot closer to the fire and squint in the low orange glow. The skin is pale, waxy, almost bluish around the edges. Astrid notices and walks over, peering down with a frown. "How long were you outside yesterday?" she asks. You tell her about the roof-clearing chore, about losing track of time. She doesn't scold you, she just walks away and comes back with a pot of something thick and smelly. Goose fat. She slathers it over your toes, then wraps them tightly in cloth. "No more barefoot dreams," she mutters. "You freeze those off, I'm not carrying you around." This is your official introduction to the terrifying world of Viking-era frostbite. Here's your historical reminder. This wasn't rare. Norse winters didn't care how tough you were. If your fingers or toes got too cold for too long, they died, quietly, without fuss. And sometimes so did you. They called it kuldaskada, cold damage. There were no surgeons, no amputations with anaesthesia. Just pain, rot, and prayer. Or, if you were lucky, just a few dead patches of skin and a limp that lasted forever. The goose fat is warm, sticky, and smells like something between old stew and wet feathers. You endure it. It might save your toes. Astrid massages the circulation back into your foot while humming a tune you don't recognise. Something slow and lilting. Not happy exactly, but not grim either. It's strangely comforting. For your nightly fringe fact, some Viking remedies for frostbite included rubbing the skin with snow or submerging the affected area in cold water. Not warm, because sudden heat could cause more damage. Modern science confirms this in part. Controlled rewarming is safer than rapid heat exposure. But other remedies were less effective. One Icelandic source recommends urinating on the frozen limb. Another mentions placing the affected part under the armpit of a healthy person until feeling returns. You're grateful Astrid went with goose fat instead. There's a quiet debate in the academic world about how well-equipped Norse societies were for cold-related injuries. Some historians believe they were highly adaptive, citing the development of layered wool clothing, fur-lined boots, and community-based warmth strategies. Others argue the cold still regularly outpaced their technology, especially in poorer regions. Archaeological digs have uncovered skeletons with deformed toes, fused joints, and bone lesions consistent with long-term exposure to extreme cold. So yeah, frostbite was part of the package. You spend the day mostly inside, full elevated, pretending not to feel like a burden. The younger boy's fever has finally broken, and the longhouse is a little livelier because of it. Leif's cough is still hanging on, but not as wet-sounding as before. The widow says, the worst has passed, which you desperately hope is true, but that doesn't mean anyone is celebrating, because outside winter still owns the world, and inside food is running out again. You've learned to read the widow's mood by how she stirs the pot. When she uses a big ladle and makes a show of scraping the bottom, it's good news, something rich, maybe even a bit of meat or leftover rabbit broth. But when she uses the small spoon and stirs slowly, with that faraway look in her eyes, that's famine cooking. Today's meal is snow-thinned bone broth and one flatbread, split 4 ways. It tastes like warm nothing. The flatbread is more bark than barley now, dense and brittle. You chew it slowly, eyes closed, imagining butter. The others do the same. You all pretend it's filling. The good news? Your foot feels a little better. The colour's not great, but there's some warmth now. You can move the toes without crying, that's progress. Astrid checks them twice, then gives you a nod. You're keeping them, she says. For now, high praise. Later you help Leif mend a broken spear shaft. Even with your foot bundled, you're useful enough to hold the pieces steady while he binds them with sinew. You ask what the spear's for. Hunting? Defence? He just grunts. Both. You don't ask more. You've learnt that in Viking winter. Most tools are dual purpose. Here's where it gets weird. That night, while everyone is asleep, you wake to a strange sound. Not coughing, not wind. It's humming. A low, steady hum, almost like a chant coming from just outside the longhouse. You sit up, heart suddenly pounding. Who would be out there in the cold at this hour? You crawl to the shutter and peek through a gap in the wood. There's nothing, just snow, blue-grey shadows. The wind has died down and the sky is cloudy. But still, you hear it. A voice. Faint. Melodic. It's not a hallucination, you're sure of it. You wake Astrid. She listens too. Her eyes go wide, not in fear, more like recognition. She whispers, "The snow singer." You ask what that means. She just shakes her head. Old story. Someone who walks between storms, sings to the dying. You stare at her. That's not comforting. Wasn't meant to be, she says, pulling her blanket tighter. Go back to sleep. You try, you really do. But the voice lingers in your head long after it fades. You finally drift off just before dawn, dreaming of someone standing in the snow, wrapped in furs, face hidden, humming a tune that makes your blood freeze and your heart race. The next morning, nothing is said about it. No tracks outside, no signs of anything. Maybe it was just wind, but everyone eats breakfast a little quieter. Here's one last unsettling fact for the night. Viking folklore is full of winter spirits. Not gods, spirits. Half-forgotten beings that haunt the snowbanks, steal warmth, sing lullabies that lure people into freezing sleep. Some believe these stories were just metaphors for hypothermia and madness. Others insist the stories came from somewhere. You don't know what you believe anymore, but you keep your boots close and your blankets closer. And when Astrid checks your foot again that evening, she pauses, frowns and says, "It's warmer than yesterday." Then she smirks. Maybe the snow singer left you a gift. You don't laugh, you don't say anything at all, you just nod and pull the blanket higher. The dark isn't just a backdrop anymore. It's a character in the longhouse, one you live with, eat beside, sleep near. It has moods. Some nights it just sits quietly in the corners watching. Other nights it presses against the windows like a jealous outsider desperate to get in. You're used to it now. Or maybe it's worn you down enough that you've stopped noticing. There's a rhythm to the days, but it's not the kind that brings comfort. You wake, eat something warmish if there's anything left, tend the fire, help with chores, and try not to go completely insane. The days are like beads on a string, nearly identical grey, and a little chipped around the edges. Time passes in a fog of ash and breath. But today the dark feels heavier, like it's leaning in. Astrid hasn't spoken much since the snow singer night. Not in a sulky way, more like she's conserving energy. Her face is drawn, her voice a whisper. She moves like her bones hurt. Everyone's moving like that now, really, except Leif, who's running on pure stubbornness. He chopped a week's worth of wood yesterday, even though the cough's returned and his lips are still purple around the edges. When you asked if he was okay, he just looked at you and said, "I'm too angry to die." Honestly, fair. The boy is mostly better. He eats again, smiles sometimes. The fever left him thinner, quieter. A little less boy, a little more wary survivor. You know the look. This evening, after the world fades back into its usual dim grey, the widow sends you and Astrid to clean out the ash pit beneath the hearth. It's a disgusting chore. You scrape out layers of greasy blackened powder choking on the dust. Your hands go grey to the wrists. Astrid finds a scorched beetle husk in the pile and flicks it at you. You yelp. She grins. A tiny flicker of mischief returns to her face, and for a second the longhouse feels like it might breathe again. You take that second and hold it like a precious stone. Here's your historical anchor. Viking winters weren't just dangerous for the body, they tested the mind. The dark, the silence, the isolation, it all added up. Seasonal affective disorder, SAD, wasn't a clinical term then, but it was absolutely real. No sunlight meant no vitamin D, no daily variety meant no mental stimulation. The mind dulled, then dimmed, then sometimes disappeared altogether. The sagas don't talk about it, but the skeletons buried side by side with no signs of violence or disease. Some historians believe those were the quiet casualties of the dark. And now for your quirky side note. Some Viking communities used mirrors, usually polished metal or water bowls, to reflect any available sunlight deeper into their longhouses. It didn't make things bright exactly, but it helped. You think of this now as you sit near the fire, wishing desperately for something as simple as a sunbeam. You'd trade 3 bowls of bark bread just to see your shadow. There's a scholarly debate you'd love to weigh in on if your brain weren't wrapped in fog. Did Viking winter rituals evolve to battle seasonal depression? Some say yes, that communal meals, shared storytelling, and rituals like blot, animal sacrifices to the gods, served as psychological buoyancy. Others argue these were just cultural norms with no real mental health benefits. But from where you're sitting, in a fur-lined corner of a poky house full of coughing, silence, and fatigue, those rituals might have been the only things keeping people tethered to reality. You get a break from chores mid-afternoon, if you can call it that. You lie back near the fire, rubbing your hands together. They're starting to crack at the knuckles. Everyone's are. The skin splits, bleeds, then heals crooked. You chew on a bit of leather cord to distract yourself from the aching joints in your toes, the weird tightness in your chest, and the growing sense that you haven't laughed in a very long time. Astrid plops down next to you, blanket around her shoulders, and stares into the fire. "Do you miss the sun?" she asks, not looking at you. You nod. "I think I'd let it kill me just to feel warm again." She huffs a tired laugh. "Me too." You talk about spring, what you'll do if it comes, what food you'll eat first. You say bread with butter like it's an incantation. She says, "A whole fish, roasted over a fire, no soup, no bones." Then she adds, "And berries. I want to eat until I'm sick." You both go quiet again. The widow breaks the silence with the story. Not the usual bleak folklore, but something older. She speaks of a man who wandered into the woods in the dead of winter and never returned. But instead of dying, he found a hidden valley, green and sunlit even in midwinter. The people there never aged, never starved. But the catch, if he ever left, he'd forget the way back. He stayed. Until one day he heard his mother's voice on the wind and followed it home. By the time he arrived, everyone he knew was gone. You ask if it's true. She shrugs. Does it matter? Later, as night folds over the house again, you sit by the hearth with your back against the wall. The fire crackles. The darkness outside thickens. The longhouse creaks and shifts as the cold presses in, and still no one speaks. But you all listen to the fire, to the wind, to the silence that hums with something unspoken. You remember that scholar's note about Viking isolation, how winter was considered a spiritual time, sacred, dangerous, thin-veiled. The gods weren't quiet in winter, they were just harder to hear. You feel that now, like something is near, just beyond the walls. Not evil, not exactly, but ancient, watching. Astrid leans her head against your shoulder again, eyes already closed. You feel her weight, her warmth. It's not much, but it's something real, something human. You fall asleep like that, listening to the fire, hoping tomorrow will be brighter, even by a minute. Because in this endless winter, a minute of light is everything. It happens in the middle of the night, one of those long, dragging winter stretches where time feels like it's frozen alongside everything else. The fire dies down just enough to let the cold creep in, subtle and stealthy. The kind of cold that doesn't slap you across the face, fierce, but seeps into your bones like smoke into old cloth. You wake up with your nose stiff, your breath visible, and your fingertips tingling. The longhouse is quiet. Too quiet. You push yourself up and glance around. Everyone's asleep. Even Leif, who usually stirs at the slightest sound, is curled up beneath his cloak, unmoving. You notice it then, the fire. It's almost out, just a few glowing embers tucked under a pile of collapsing ash. No one noticed. Maybe they noticed and couldn't move. Couldn't find the strength. Panic starts low in your chest. Not because you're scared of the dark, but because the fire going out could mean death. Simple as that. No heat, no way to cook, no defence against the cold outside, no light to see by. In a Viking winter, the hearth isn't a luxury. It's a life source. You stagger toward it, grabbing the small pile of kindling left nearby. Your hands shake, not from fear, but from hunger and fatigue. You blow gently on the embers, eyes stinging from the smoke and the cold. Nothing. You blow again, harder than this tea. Until sparks dance up and vanish into the dark. A small glow. A flicker. You throw a handful of dry twigs on it. Another breath. The fire flares, then collapses inward, struggling to survive. Just like you. Eventually it catches. You sit back, chest heaving, skin slick with sweat despite the chill. You've done it. You kept the fire alive. You feel like you've saved a life, maybe several. Because here's a historical truth that gets buried under all the heroic tales. Viking winters killed more people through accidents than battles. Fires going out, roofs collapsing, slipping on ice, infection from frostbite. It wasn't the ice giants or the gods that got you. It was the slow, grinding math of cold versus calories. You feed the flames until they're still, then slump back against the wall. Across the room, the widow stirs. She looks at you, sees the renewed fire, and gives a small nod. No words, just acknowledgement. That's all you need. Here's your fringe fact for the night. Norse mythology had a being called Logi, a personification of fire. Fierce, ravenous, unstoppable. Fire was both friend and destroyer. It cooked your meals, lit your nights, and warmed your blood. But it could also eat your home if left unchecked. Fires often consumed entire Viking longhouses in dry seasons. In winter, though, you wished for that heat, no matter how dangerous. There's debate among historians about whether Viking homes had fire guardians, supernatural figures or spirits meant to protect the hearth. Some sagas suggest offerings were left near the fire at night, bits of bread, drops of ale, to keep it burning and to please whatever watched from the flames. Was it ritual? Was it habit? Was it just something to do when you were scared and cold and needed something, anything to hold on to? You find yourself doing it now. After everyone wakes and breakfast is nothing more than boiled water with a pinch of grain, you sneak a piece of flatbread from your ration and place it near the hearth, just in case. You don't tell anyone, not because you're ashamed, but because it feels private, quiet, sacred maybe. The day drags on, but something feels different. The light stays a little longer, just a sliver more sun peeking through the clouds before vanishing again. You stare at it like a starving man watching a feast from behind glass. It's weak and watery, but it's light. You let it hit your face for a moment, eyes closed, breathing slow. The leaf takes you out to chop more wood. Your foot still hurts, but you manage. The snow's packed down hard and the path to the woods is more ice than trail. You slip twice, catch yourself on a branch once, and laugh despite yourself. Leif grunts. "You're learning," he says, then adds, "Clumsy learning, but learning." The trees creak around you, dripping just slightly in the midday warmth. You hear birds, just one or two, distant and faint, but birds. Leif stops and listens. "Spring," he mutters. Then he adds, "or a cruel trick." You help him load the sled with as much dry wood as it can handle. It's heavy. Your arms ache. Your shoulders feel like someone drove nails into them. But it's good work, the kind of tired that feels like purpose. You return to the longhouse in silence, save for the soft crunch of the sled skimming over icy snow. That night, the widow prepares a rare treat. She's saved the bones from the rabbit, the fish, and even a pigeon. Astrid found half frozen near the eaves last week. She boils them down into something thick and gelatinous. Bone broth. It smells like hope. Everyone gets one bowl. You sip it slowly, letting the warmth coat your throat and spread down to your core. It's salty, a little greasy, full of tiny floating bits that you don't question. Best meal in days. And here's your academic twist. Bone broth wasn't just food, it was strategy. Vikings boiled bones for hours to draw out every nutrient. Nothing was wasted. Bones, cartilage, marrow, even hooves and beaks if they had to. The broth wasn't just sustenance, it was medicine. Rich in collagen and fat, it helped the body hold heat. When meat was gone, the bones became sacred. You notice the boy asleep by the fire, cheeks flushed with health again. Astrid braids her hair for the first time in weeks. Leif sharpens his axe with a little more care than usual. The widow hums while washing the cooking pot. The longhouse is still cold, the dark is still deep. But something in the air has shifted. It's not joy, not yet, but maybe the faint early scent of resilience. You stay awake a little later that night, Umfried her, watching the fire. It's strong now, logs popping, flames licking up toward the rafters. You see shapes in it, or think you do. Maybe that's just your tired brain playing tricks again. Maybe not. The old stories say fire speaks if you know how to listen. You don't, not yet, but you're starting to hear something. You learn quickly that in Viking winter, weather isn't just a condition, it's a force of personality. And today, that personality is angry. Somewhere around mid-morning, the wind begins to howl, not the sad, lonesome kind you've gotten used to, but something more guttural. Violent, like the sky has teeth and it's decided to bite down on everything that moves. The longhouse shakes under it. Rafters groan. Even the animals huddle tighter, pressing against the walls like they want to vanish into the wood. Leif calls it snöstorma, snowstorm. But his tone gives it weight, like the word doesn't just describe the weather, it summons it. You watch the light outside disappear by mid-afternoon, snuffed out behind sheets of white. It's not snow like you've ever seen it before. It comes sideways, biting into the gaps in the shutters, hissing through every tiny crack. The snow outside isn't just falling, it's screaming. Visibility drops to 0. Astrid opens the door for half a second to check the goat pen, and snow blasts inside like a living thing, coating the floor and the hearth in a fine icy dust before she can slam it shut. No one says it out loud, but the mood shifts instantly. This isn't stay inside and keep warm weather. This is don't die weather. Here's your historical reality check. Blizzards were a constant threat in the Norse world, especially in highland farms and coastal settlements. They struck fast and often without warning. Travel during a storm was usually fatal, and if someone got caught outside, well, assuming they weren't buried alive, they'd freeze before morning. Many Viking households had protocols, extra rope lines between buildings, so snow shelters and firewood stored indoors. But none of that guaranteed survival. You have a weird thought. You're inside and you still don't feel safe. The wind pounds the longhouse like fists, rattling the wooden door on its hinges. Snow begins to stack higher outside, pushing against the sides of the structure, like it's trying to smother it. The smoke hole overhead is temporarily closed, which means more smoke inside and less warmth escaping. That also means more coughing. The boy's fever is gone, but he's curled under 2 layers of pelts, eyes darting beneath his lids like he's dreaming of wolves. Leif tightens the rope around the door brace, checking it twice, then sits down silently. Even he looks rattled. Astrid is boiling pine resin with water and Sigurd leftover bits of mint, trying to make a tea that will cut the smell and calm the nerves. You take your mug gratefully, even though it tastes like tree bark mixed with regret. And now for your fringe historical tidbit. During major snowstorms, some Norse families practiced what were essentially sensory deprivation techniques. They would sit instantly in the dark with their eyes covered, breathing slowly to conserve both heat and mental clarity. Some accounts even suggest they believed that making noise during a storm invited the spirits of winter in, so silence wasn't just practical, it was protective. Which leads us to the debate. Were Viking-era snowstorms interpreted as supernatural events? Some scholars say yes. There are sagas that describe blizzards as divine punishments or omens, particularly associated with frost giants or Jotnar who are said to wield the power of ice and wind. Others argue that these tales were just narrative flourishes, ways to make sense of terrifying natural events in a world with no forecasts, no warning systems, no maps. Either way, you're sitting here in the middle of one, and it absolutely feels like something ancient is angry. The fire flickers weakly. The wind is stealing heat from the walls, sucking it through the boards like a vampire. You throw on another log, then another. The woodpile is shrinking fast. You huddle with Astrid and the boy under a shared blanket, back to the hearth, faces turned away from the draught. No one speaks. Even breathing feels too loud. Then, just when you start to think maybe the worst is over, there's a sound outside. A crash. Not thunder, not wind, wood raking. Leif is up instantly. He grabs a spear and presses his ear to the wall. Another noise, a creaking like something's shifting. Then comes the real fear. A groan from the ceiling. The roof. You all move, fast, shoving animals away from the central beam, dragging sleeping pallets toward the fire. The storm has piled so much snow onto the roof that it's threatening to collapse. Leif and the widow shout instructions. Astrid grabs a pole and braces one of the side supports. You just do as you're told, trying to ignore the way the roof visibly sags above you. Here's the lovely overlooked reality of Viking architecture. Longhouses were sturdy, yes, but not invincible. Too much snow, especially wet snow, could compromise a roof's integrity. And with no chainsaws or snowplows, clearing it meant climbing up and hoping you didn't slide off and vanish into a drift. Entire houses have collapsed during storms like this, and when they did, no one inside walked away. You and Leif wedge logs beneath the main beam, trying to hold it upright. Your arms are shaking, not just from cold now, but from fear. It creaks again, loud, horrible, and wet sounding. Then mercifully silence. You all freeze. The roof doesn't collapse. Not yet. It's past midnight before the wind starts to let up. The snow keeps falling, but the air changes. Softer, less punishing. You dare to move again. Astrid hands you a cup of hot broth. More water than anything, but you drink it like it's holy. Your hands are numb from holding the support beam for hours, and your shoulders ache like they've been chewed on. Eventually someone opens the door a crack, just enough to peek out. The storm is over. The landscape outside is unrecognisable. Everything is buried. The snow reaches nearly to the windowsills. The barn is missing, just gone, collapsed under the weight from the hold it. The goat pen is completely submerged. Leif swears under his breath and starts pulling on his boots. You help him dig. It takes hours just to find the barn door, and when you do, it's flattened. Wood splintered like matchsticks. Miraculously, one of the goats survived, pressed into a corner under a fallen beam, wide-eyed and shaking but alive. You carry it back inside like a war hero returning from battle. It licks your face once, then promptly pees on your cloak. You don't care. That night, the longhouse is warm again. The fire is strong, the goat snores beside the hearth. You sit wrapped in every layer you own, still wearing damp boots, too exhausted to move. Astrid rests her head on your leg, asleep almost instantly. Leif is already sharpening something again, just to keep his hands busy. The widow pours the last of the pine tea and whispers something to the fire. You think it might be a thank you. You close your eyes, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you sleep deeply. Not safely, but deeply. And when you dream, the storm isn't chasing you anymore. It's behind you now. It starts with a fight over nothing, the kind that simmers all day in silence before erupting like a pot left too long on the fire. It's Leif and Astrid this time. You don't even catch the beginning. Something about spilled water or firewood that wasn't stacked right, or maybe a misplaced knife. By the time you realise it's happening, voices are raised, faces are red, and the boy's already crying in the corner covering his ears. The longhouse shrinks. It was already small, but now it feels suffocating. The walls don't just hold in warmth anymore. They trap anger, resentment, cabin fever if you want the modern word for it. But here, it's more primal. You've been packed together for so long, breathing the same smoky air, choking down the same flavourless meals, sleeping inches apart, that something's bound to snap eventually. Leif storms out, slamming the door hard enough that snow shakes from the roof. Astrid stares after him, arms crossed tight, lips pressed into a line so thin it could cut glass. No one says anything. The fire crackles, the goat farts. You try to help, you mumble something neutral. He'll cool off, or maybe it's just the storm talking. But she shakes her head, biting back tears. It's not just him, she says. It's this house, this winter. I hate it. And yeah, you get it. Here's the cold truth from history. Cabin fever was more than a mood. In long winters, especially in isolated homesteads like this, tension didn't just rise, it boiled. There are documented cases of fights turning lethal over things as small as who got the last cup of broth or whose turn it was to tend the fire. Viking sagas sometimes hint at these breakdowns without fully admitting them, but you can read between the lines. Too many people, not enough space, not enough food, not enough escape. Even today, studies of Arctic explorers show what long-term confinement does to the brain. Mood swings, memory loss, hallucinations, paranoia, and that's with radios, showers and protein bars. You've got a moss pillow, a smoky fire, and one spoon between 5 people. Fringe fact of the day: some Norse families believed in something called the tunzot, or house sickness. It wasn't an illness exactly, more of a spiritual condition. A sense that the house itself could become cursed during long winters if grief, anger, or fear wasn't handled properly. People might refuse to speak for days, or begin muttering to the walls. One folk belief says that if too many people dream the same bad dream in the same room, the house is marked by death. Comforting. There's a scholarly argument about whether these stories were metaphor or mental illness. Some believe the tunzot was their attempt to describe what we now call seasonal depression or psychosis. Others think it reflected a cultural belief in the spirit of the house itself, the idea that homes weren't just structures, but living, feeling things that could go mad along with their inhabitants. You're not sure what you believe, but the longhouse does feel different now. The tension hangs in the rafters, even the fire seems quieter. That night you all eat in near silence. A few boiled roots, 1 spoon of broth, and flatbread so dry it nearly splinters in your mouth. The boy keeps his eyes down. Leif hasn't come back yet. It's Leif who always checks the traps. Leif who keeps the wolves at bay. Leif who knows how to repair the axe when the haft splits. Without him, everything feels off balance. Astrid doesn't sleep that night. You hear her shifting, sitting up, walking quietly to the door and back again. Once, you catch her whispering, not to you, just to the dark. Leif returns in the morning, red-faced and silent. His boots are caked in ice. He sets down a bundle, 2 rabbits, frozen stiff, eyes wide like they died mid-thought. He doesn't speak, just drops them near the fire and sits. You hand him a mug of hot water. He takes it without looking at you. Later, after the rabbits are skinned and cooking, he and Astrid speak again. No apologies. Just small things. Did you fix the wood sled? Yeah. Okay, it's enough. In this place, that has to be enough. You spend the afternoon mending rope. Your fingers are stiff, but the rhythm is soothing. Over, under, pull. Over, under, pull. You watch the fibres twist together and think about how the longhouse is held up by the same principle. Pressure and tension imbalance. Too tight, it snaps. Too loose, it falls apart. Astrid sits beside you, slicing bark for the next round of flatbread. Do you think it ever ends? She asks, not looking up. You don't answer. Not because you don't want to, but because you don't know. The truth is, you're afraid it won't. That winter will stretch forever. That you'll be trapped in this house until you forget what warm air feels like. That you'll lose someone before spring even thinks about arriving, but you say, it has to. She nods, like she needs to believe it, even if you don't. That night, the rabbit stew is almost indulgent. There's fat in it. Actual fat. Your bowl warms your hands and your chest, and for the first time in weeks, you don't finish wishing there were more. Not because you're full, but because you're grateful. Leif even tells a story, a short one, something about a bear that stole his boot when he was a kid. It's not particularly funny, but you laugh anyway. Everyone does. The boy giggles so hard he snorts. The widow chuckles. Astrid wipes a tear from her eye. No one mentions the fight. No one has to. Because this is how you fix the cracks. Not with apologies, but with shared soup and tired stories and quiet nods. You go to sleep feeling strangely whole. The house creaks, but not angrily. The wind whistles softly outside, but it's not howling. Even the dark feels less oppressive. You dream of sitting at a table outside, sunlight on your skin, Leif beside you sharpening a knife, Astrid laughing, the widow humming to herself as she bakes something sweet and warm-smelling. The boy chasing a goat that's somehow sprouted antlers. It doesn't feel like a fantasy, it feels like spring. You're starting to wonder how the children ever made it through this. Not just survived, but lived through it. Months of biting cold, thin soup and the unrelenting press of darkness. It's hard enough for you, an adult with a semi-functional or prefrontal cortex, and decades of modern coping mechanisms. But the boy? He's maybe 6, 7 tops, and yet he wakes up every morning bundled in moss-lined wool, cheeks pink with cold, eyes wide like he's expecting something magical to happen at any moment. You envy him. He plays with bones, actual bones, like they're toys, makes little people out of them. A knuckle becomes a farmer. A fish spine becomes a dragon. You try to join in once, make a joke about how your bone warrior can beat his bone wizard, but he just frowns and says, "That's not a wizard, that's a ghost." Then he sets it gently on the windowsill, whispering something under his breath that makes the hair on your neck stand up. You don't join in after that. Astrid teaches him little chores, mostly to keep him occupied. He stirs the porridge, carries wood in tiny bundles, and feeds the goat with the seriousness of a man entrusted with a royal charge. It's strange watching him. Children here don't get to be useless. There's no such thing as too young to help. If you can walk, you can carry water. If you can speak, you can pray. Childhood doesn't get a free ride. Here's your historical insight for the night. Viking children grew up fast. Life expectancy hovered around 35 to 40 years, so by the time you were 10, you were already halfway to middle age. Kids were taught survival skills young, how to trap, how to identify edible roots, how to stitch a wound without flinching. They didn't get snow days, they got snow chores. And here's a strange fact you probably weren't expecting. Some Viking households lined babies' cradles with reindeer moss and dried grass instead of cloth. Why? Because they absorbed moisture and added insulation. Basically, it was a natural diaper and blanket combo. There's even some evidence they used carved wooden pacifiers coated in honey or fat. You know, just in case you needed an image that was both adorable and vaguely unsettling. But here's the debate. Were Viking kids emotionally stunted by these conditions, or were they simply adapted to a world that didn't pretend to be soft? Some scholars argue that children in the Norse world formed deep bonds with family and community through shared labour. Others believe the trauma of constant cold, death and hunger left scars we'll never fully understand. Either way, the boy in the longhouse is proof that resilience doesn't need permission. One morning, he wakes you up by dropping a dead mouse in your lap. "Look," he says, beaming, "caught it myself." You do your best not to scream. Turns out he rigged a small snare with help from Leaf, using bent twigs, twine, and a dab of animal fat. And it worked. You're horrified and impressed in equal measure. The widow roasts it over the fire, peels off the skin, and offers everyone a bite. You pass. Astrid doesn't. Later, while washing up near the melt bucket, Astrid laughs and says, "That was probably the first warm meal he's gotten to hunt for himself. You're lucky he didn't put it in your boot." You believe her. There's something about the way the children here move. Deliberate, small, efficient. They don't waste energy. They don't run for fun. They don't shout or jump or fling themselves around like modern kids hopped up on sugar and screen time. They whisper, they watch, they wait. Even their games are quiet. The boy stacks sticks by the hearth, trying to build a tower without making any noise. When it falls, he doesn't yell, just sighs and starts over. Astrid plays a guessing game with him using pieces of bark and stone. The rules make no sense to you, but they both act like it's the height of strategic warfare. After the stew that night, which is more melted snow, gusto than anything, you sit with the boy by the fire. He hands you a stick, points to the shadows on the wall, and says, "That one's the mountain." You look. It's just a lump of wood jutting from the wall, but you nod. "Okay," you say. "And that?" He points again. "That's the wolf. It's waiting." You're not sure if this is imagination or warning, or both. Later, Leif tells a story about a child who wandered off during a blizzard and returned a week later, unharmed, claiming they'd been kept safe by an old woman made of ice and bone who lived inside a mountain. The child never felt cold, never got hungry. When asked where the mountain was, they could never find it again. The boy listens, wide-eyed but not afraid, just curious. That night, while everyone else sleeps, you hear the boy talking softly in his sleep. Words you don't understand, not Old Norse, not anything you recognise. Just soft murmurs, breathy and rhythmic. You lean closer to check on him, and as you do, he opens his eyes and says perfectly clear, "Don't wake them. They're dreaming of spring." Then he closes his eyes again and drifts off. You don't sleep after that. Here's one last historical whisper. Viking folklore didn't shy away from children as spiritual conduits. In some stories, they were believed to be more tuned in to the unseen, able to sense spirits, predict weather, or speak truths they didn't understand. Whether that was superstition or simply the way children mirrored the tension of their world is up for debate. but you can't shake the feeling that the boy in the longhouse knows something the rest of you don't. In the morning, he's back to chasing the goat and chewing on a stick like nothing happened. But when he looks at you, there's something behind those eyes. Not ancient, not supernatural, just surviving. And somehow that's stranger than magic. The gods are not helping. You've heard their names whispered in the dark, spat into the fire, and muttered in the middle of chores when someone hits a thumb with a mallet or drops a bucket of snow meant for drinking water. But today the names are louder. Today it feels like the gods are being summoned, not for celebration but for negotiation. Maybe even a little begging. It starts when the widow climbs onto the hearthstone just after the morning meal, if you can call a crust of frozen flatbread and a cup of sour milk a meal. She holds a small carved figure in her hands, roughly the size of a child's fist. It's lopsided, worn smooth with age. You can't tell who it's meant to be. Could be Thor, could be Freya, could be a piece of driftwood someone decided had the vibe of a god. Doesn't matter, it's symbolic. And tonight, apparently, it's time for the house to make its offering. Astrid clears the table. Leif extinguishes the hearth fire, just for a moment, and relights it with a fresh spark, muttering something under his breath. The boy is solemn, sitting cross-legged with a strip of leather in his hands. He keeps rubbing it like a prayer bead. You don't know what's happening, but no one explains. You sit, you watch, you learn. Here's your historical marker. Vikings didn't see winter as just a season, it was a spiritual trial. This wasn't, ugh, it's cold. This was, are we worthy enough to make it through? Every family had household rituals, offerings to local spirits, ancestral worship, and big prayers to the Aesir and Vanir gods alike. Winter sacrifices were common, not always animal, and only occasionally human, you'll be relieved to know. More often it was food, ale, tools, a symbolic loss to gain favour from forces far bigger than your fire pit. And here's the fringe fact that makes your stomach twist. There's evidence in the sagas and burial sites that some midwinter rituals involved the offering of blood. Not war blood, not sacrifice blood, but a quiet prick from the finger, a few drops into the fire, not enough to wound, just enough to prove you meant it. Back in the longhouse, the widow speaks in a voice you've never heard from her before, clear, steady, and sharp. She addresses the fire directly, using the kind of Old Norse that sounds like stone rolling over stone. It isn't poetic, it's practical. We're still here, she says, but we're tired. We've done our part, now you do yours. Then she drops something into the fire, a carved spoon, a token of value in a world where wood is precious. Astrid adds a ribbon, faded red, frayed at both ends. The boy tosses in a single pine cone. Leif throws in a shard of bone, blackened at one end. You don't know what to offer. You reach into your pocket and find a bit of smooth stone you've carried since your arrival, no idea why. You add it to the flames. The fire accepts everything without question. There's a scholarly argument about whether these household offerings were centralized traditions or regional improvisations. Some believe there were shared rituals passed down from clan to clan, uniform prayers, sacred chants, predictable timing. Others argue that every household did what they could when they had to, using whatever they had on hand. Evidence leans toward the latter. Viking spirituality wasn't polished. It was raw, earthy, immediate, just like though. After the fire returns to full strength, the mood shifts. Not lighter, not hopeful, but settled. Like the debt's been paid for now, and what happens next is out of your hands. You feel that tightness in your chest, anxiety, fatigue, a weird kind of guilt, ease just slightly. Later that day, the sky changes. The clouds break just enough to let down a beam of light. Thin, wan, but real sunlight. It strikes the snow like a sword, scattering shadows across the courtyard. Everyone stops what they're doing. Astrid whispers, "It's a sign." You want to believe her. That evening, the widow prepares something different. Not bark bread, not broth, but a kind of sea, if you can call it that. It's made of crushed seeds, lard, and a handful of dried berries and mixed into a patty and seared on a stone. It smells like burnt hope, but it tastes amazing. You all share one, just one. Even the boy doesn't complain. And here's the catch, it's not just food, it's a gift, a sacred dish for a sacred night. The widow calls it blotkaka, sacrifice cake. Not for the gods this time, but for the house, the walls, the fire, the bones of the place. After dinner, she leaves a piece near the threshold. where the cold seeps through worst. You ask her why. She just says, to remind them we're still inside. The fire is especially strong that night. You feed it 3 logs, more than usual, but no one stops you. The warmth pushes back the cold. You feel your toes again. You feel your soul again. You catch Astrid watching the flames like they're speaking to her. Maybe they are. Here's a final thought for the night. The gods didn't live in the sky, not to the Vikings. They lived in the world, in the woods. The wind. The fire. The breath of your dying goat, the crack in the floorboards, the voice that calls your name from the snow when you're too tired to answer. That's why the rituals weren't grand. They were intimate, quiet, personal. You go to bed with the taste of seed cake still on your tongue. It lingers like memory. The boy sleeps with a piece of pine bark clutched in his hand. Leif snores gently. The widow rocks slightly, humming that same wordless tune you first heard during the snowstorm. Astrid leans against the wall, eyes half closed, face glowing in the firelight. You don't pray before sleep, but you whisper one word to the flames. Please! And for once it feels like something listens. The howl comes just after midnight. Not wind, not wolves, not something you can excuse as a strange creak in the wood, or the groan of settling snow. This is different, sharper, too low to be human, too deliberate to be anything natural. The sound starts far off, almost gentle, but grows with each passing second until it scrapes along your spine like the teeth of something watching from the dark. Everyone wakes up at once. Leif is already halfway into his boots, spear in hand. Astrid doesn't speak, but she grabs the boy and pulls him toward the rear wall of the longhouse, clutching him close under a pile of furs. The widow sits near the fire, motionless, eyes fixed on the door. You're frozen, literally and figuratively. The sound doesn't stop, it circles, it moves. Whatever's out there is pacing around the house, pressing just close enough that you can hear it shift through the snow. It's not stomping, it's not clumsy. It's careful, curious, and then it sniffs, long and slow, like it's testing the air for your scent. Your heartbeat is a drum in your ears. Leif gestures for silence. Not that anyone's making a sound. Even the goat is quiet, so is the fire. The shadows it throws across the floor feel longer than they should be. Here's your historical truth bomb. Viking villages weren't always built with fences or walls. Outposts and isolated farms especially had little protection beyond stacked logs and family weapons. And in winter, when resources ran low, animals became desperate. And so did people. There are stories, quiet ones, of wolves that walked on 2 legs, of men driven mad by hunger who became predators in the night. And real wolves? Oh, they came too. Not packs, usually. Just the lone ones, the smart ones, the hungry ones. Which brings us to tonight's fringe fact. Norse mythology is full of wolves, and not just Fenrir, the giant wolf fated to swallow Odin at Ragnarok. There were others, shadow wolves, frost wolves, creatures that hunted not just flesh but fear. Some believed wolves could sense weakened houses, homes where the fire was low, the food was gone, the strength was fading. They came for those, and not always for the livestock. Sometimes they came for the children. There's scholarly debate about how much of this is mythology and how much is a chilling reflection of reality. A recent study suggested that wolf attacks in harsh winters increased tenfold in certain regions, particularly in years following crop failure. So when the old stories talk about the wolves circling the house, it's not always poetic. You think it's about that as something thumps against the door. Hard, a paw, a shoulder. You don't know, but it's strong. The door shakes. Leif steps forward, spear ready. The widow mutters something under her breath. Astrid clamps the boy's mouth shut with her hand. You hold your breath. You don't even realise you're doing it until your lungs scream for air. Another thump. This one higher, like claws scraping wood. The fire sputters, then, for one long, unnatural moment, everything goes completely still. No breathing, no wind, no movement. You hear your heartbeat. You feel it in your fingertips. Then a sound from the roof, above you. You jerk your head up. The rafters creak. The snow packed on the roof groans under shifting weight. It's up there, whatever it is. You and Leif both look at each other at the same time, eyes wide. He mouths the word, rafters. You want to say it's impossible, but you don't. Because this winter has already taught you that impossible is just a word people use when they're comfortable. You grab a poker from the fire, half weapon, half torch, and stand, barely breathing. Leif inches toward the wall with a bow and one of the few remaining arrows. The door creaks again. It's like the wood itself is holding its breath. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stops. Whatever was out there is gone. No more scraping, no more creaking, no more thumps. Just silence. Not peaceful silence. Predator silence. You wait for 10 more minutes before anyone moves. Finally, Leif opens the shutter just an inch, just enough to look. Nothing. Just snow, undisturbed, clean, like whatever came never touched it. You can't decide if that's more or less terrifying. No one goes back to sleep. You sit by the fire, everyone tense, alert, eyes drifting to the door every time the wind groans. The boy finally falls asleep with his head in Astrid's lap. You don't blame him. Children know when to shut down, when to give their fear to dreams. You stay awake. Here's one more piece of historical context for your nightmares. Norse families often carved protective runes onto their doorways and beams, symbols to keep out evil, to guard the home. Some were for luck, others were specifically against wolves. Not just the animal, but the idea, the archetype, the symbol of hunger made flesh. There are runes on this house, you've seen them, carved deep into the beam above the door. But tonight, you wonder if there are enough. In the morning, there's a trail outside, not footprints, not paw prints, just a long dragged mark like something heavy pulled itself along the snowbank behind the house, circling twice, then veering off into the woods. Leif finds a tuft of fur caught in the doorframe. Not wolf, not dog. Greyish white, coarse, hollow in the centre, like animal fur meant to survive extreme cold. No one says the word out loud, but you're all thinking it. Fimbulvita, the great winter, the one that comes before the end, before Ragnarok. The widow burns herbs in the fire that night. It smells like pine needles and something acrid, like burning hair. She doesn't call it magic, just precaution. You all sit closer to the fire than usual. You're still not sure what came to the house. A wolf? A man? Something worse? But one thing is certain. It knows where you live. You'd think after everything, the snow, the hunger, the not-quite wolves pacing outside your door, people would stop telling ghost stories. But no. If anything, now that you're well into the heart of this frozen nightmare, the stories are flowing more freely than ever. And of course they're told at night. Always at night. Because why sleep when you can be gently terrorised by firelight and folklore? It starts with the boy. Again. He waits until the stew pot is scraped clean, barely enough for flavour, let alone fullness, then sits cross-legged beside the fire and announces, as seriously as if he were discussing trade policy, "The dead ones came last winter." Leif looks up from sharpening his axe. The widow pauses, halfway through sewing a hole in her mitten. You freeze, spoon still in hand. Only Astrid doesn't react. She just sighs and says, "Tell it right this time." The boy nods. They walked in from the east woods, past the stone circle, no coats, no breath, just walking. Skin was blue, one had no nose, one was missing fingers. And one had eyes that were all white. You're trying to decide whether to laugh or shiver when the widow adds, without looking up, "They didn't come inside, but they watched the house, all night." You blink. Wait, this happened? Leif nods, still working his whetstone. Year before you came. Worst cold we'd had until now. They followed a trader from Scarsdal. He saw them first. Said he thought they were beggars until he saw their feet weren't touching the ground. The boy chimes in again, clearly delighted by your discomfort. They come when people starve, when someone dies alone in the snow. And what do they want? You ask, regretting it even as the words leave your mouth. Astrid answers this time, her voice flat. Warmth, breath, your place by the fire. Awesome. Here's your historical dose of dread. Draugr, the Norse undead, wasn't your typical mindless zombies. They were intelligent, vengeful, restless, and more often than not, they showed up in winter. Cold preserved bodies, and when people died out in the snow, lost, forgotten, or exiled, it wasn't uncommon for those corpses to reappear in stories, knocking on doors, peering through windows, and waiting for someone foolish enough to invite them in. Sometimes they'd even mimic voices. Family members, friends. One legend tells of a man who answered his dead wife's call at the door, let her in, and was never seen again. just a tangle of blood in the snow the next morning, and the faint smell of rot near the fire pit. And now for your fringe fact. Some Viking homes buried iron nails under the thresholds, or carved Thur's runes, associated with protection against evil spirits, into their lintels. One common tactic to avoid being haunted: don't say the dead's name aloud during winter. If you speak it, they might hear it. And if they hear it, they might come, which explains why, when the boy tries to name the trader from Scarsdale, the widow snaps at him. No names after nightfall. You suddenly understand why everyone's been a little extra twitchy when darkness falls. It's not just wolves they're worried about. It's memory. It's things that wear the faces of the dead but don't blink, don't breathe. There's debate among scholars about whether the Draugr were symbolic, representations of guilt, hunger, unresolved grief, or whether they were actual figures believed to physically rise and roam. Some suggest the stories began with real fears, corpses thawing in spring, half decomposed, looking eerily intact after months in frozen ground. Or worse, those buried too shallow, unearthed by animals, and left twisted in snowbanks. Evidence of something awful, but no context to explain it. Back by the fire, Astrid's holding a stick and drawing in the ash. Her movements are slow, rhythmic. She's sketching a symbol. You don't recognise it, but it looks like a face, an open circle with a line through it, and what might be teeth. When she notices you watching, she brushes it away. Old habit, she says, keeps bad things from sticking. You want to believe it. Later that night, you wake to footsteps, soft, measured, inside the house. At first you think it's Astrid or the widow getting up to check the fire, but the fire's already strong. You can see the light flickering across the ceiling, and the steps aren't heading toward the hearth, they're circling. You sit up slowly, heart pounding. In the corner, Leaf is already awake, eyes sharp. He holds a knife in one hand, unmoving. The footsteps stop, there's no one there. But the back door, the one no one ever uses in winter, the one nailed shut weeks ago, is open just a crack. A breeze moves through the longhouse, sharp and cold and wrong. It doesn't smell like outside. It smells like damp cloth and spoiled meat. You gag. Then it's gone. You rush to the door, slam it shut and brace it with your full weight. The boards creak under your hands. Leaf nails it closed again without saying a word. The next morning the widow finds a mark in the snow outside. Not a print, a line, like something was dragged, again. But this time it's not leading away, it's leading toward the house. The boy is quieter that day. Doesn't build his usual bone towers, doesn't tell stories. He just sits by the fire watching the door, chewing on a bit of twine like it's the only thing keeping him grounded. Astrid finds you cleaning the hearth and hands you a bundle of dried juniper. "Burn this tonight," she says. It keeps them out. You ask her if it actually works. She shrugs. "We're still here, aren't we?" And you can't argue with that. The fire that night smells sharp and medicinal. The smoke stings your eyes, but you welcome it. The shadows flicker differently now, more chaotic, more alive. You sit with your back to the wall, holding a stick in your lap. Not because it's useful, but because empty hands feel like an invitation. No one speaks of the footsteps, no one mentions the door, but when the boy says he wants to sleep inside your blanket, no one stops him. You hold him tight, and for once the silence feels like protection. It's strange, the things you miss. Not warmth or sunlight or even bread, but noise, the low hum of traffic, the whirring of electronics, the distant buzz of a world always moving. Here, silence is everywhere, pressing in on all sides like snow piling against the walls. Sometimes you think your ears have gone numb, like your toes did weeks ago, but no, there's just nothing to hear, and that nothing gets loud. This morning you wake up to it again. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like the world is holding its breath. The fire crackles weakly. The wind outside doesn't moan. The boy is still asleep, his small hand curled into a fist under your chin. You lie there, blinking at the ceiling, wondering what it would feel like to hear a bird. Just one. Astrid notices too. She says it aloud over breakfast, if you can call boiled bark water and a half-thawed root a breakfast. "It's too quiet today," she says, frowning at the window. "Even the trees aren't moving." Leaf grunts. The widow doesn't look up. You glance around the room and realise something unnerving. No one has coughed in the last hour. That should be good news, but somehow it isn't. Here's your historical truth. Deep winter, particularly in the far north, brought stretches of silence so profound they became legendary. Hunters would speak of dead air, cold so deep and still that sound itself seemed frozen. No birds, no creaking branches, no falling snow, just a vast, pressing silence. Some said it was beautiful, others said it drove people mad. And here's your unsettling fringe fact. Some Viking communities believed that absolute silence was a sign of death nearby. Not symbolic death, actual death. A storm, a sickness, an accident. The world, they believed, sometimes warned you, not with noise, but with the absence of it. You try to shake off the feeling, but the silence sticks to you like frost. Every sound you make feels like an intrusion, the scrape of a spoon, the crunch of a step on packed snow, the snap of a twig when Leaf opens the wood bin. It all echoes. You go outside just to get away from it, just to hear something. But outside is worse. There's no wind, no falling snow. The sky's blank, white, empty, low, like a sheet pulled tight over the world. Even your own footsteps are muffled. You walk around the longhouse past the half-collapsed goat shed to the edge of the trees. Nothing moves, not even the shadows. You start chopping wood just to make noise. Leaf joins you an hour later, without speaking. Just hands you the smaller axe and starts splitting logs beside you. The rhythm helps. The crack of dry wood, the hiss of breath, the occasional grunt of effort. It almost feels normal. Almost. You don't talk about the silence, but you both hear it. Later, as the sky dims back into its usual smudgy grey, you return inside. The boy's playing with his bone towers again, but he's quiet, focused. He hasn't spoken all day. The widow pulls you aside and says his fever might be returning. You check his forehead. It's warm. Too warm, but not dangerously so, yet. Astrid burns another bundle of juniper in the hearth. The smoke twists oddly, drifting sideways before rising like it's reluctant. She watches it for a long time, then whispers, "They say when the smoke doesn't rise straight, something's watching." You don't ask who they are. You've learned better by now. That night the silence continues. There's no story after dinner, no coughing, no movement except the firelight flickering against the walls. You lie awake, eyes wide, ears straining for anything. Then you realise something worse than the silence. You can hear your own heartbeat. That's how quiet it is. You sit up, gently moving the boy off your arm, and make your way to the door. You open it a crack, peeking out into a world that's somehow even more still than before. The snow reflects the firelight faintly, but there's no wind. No noise, no life. Not even distant animal tracks. It's like everything that could move has chosen not to. You step outside. The cold wraps around you instantly, but it feels less harsh. Not gentle exactly, just numb. Like the world has paused. And then you hear it. A sound so faint you almost convince yourself it's your imagination. But it's not. It's music. Not with instruments. There are no flutes or lyres out here. Just a low humming tone. Almost like a voice, but not. It comes from the woods. Distant. Melancholy. A single note stretched into infinity. You stand frozen, afraid to breathe too loud. And then it stops. You rush back inside and seal the door behind you. You don't tell anyone. You just stoke the fire, check the window, sit down with the boy, and hold him close until he falls asleep. Here's a final thought to haunt you through the night. Some Viking legends speak of Huldra, forest spirits that sang songs so beautiful you'd follow them into the snow without even realising it. You'd wander, entranced, until your feet froze and your breath left your body. They didn't kill you. They just called and let nature do the rest. Maybe it wasn't a Huldra. Maybe it was just the wind. But there was no wind. You try to sleep, but every time you close your eyes, you hear it again. That low note, just barely below consciousness. You hum to yourself, anything to break the quiet. Astrid joins in softly, not looking at you. Just a simple off-key melody, nonsense words, a lullaby. You hum until the silence lets go, until the shadows forget your name, until morning. The dark doesn't just steal your sense of time, it plays with it. You're not sure what day it is anymore. You're not even sure what month. Everything blends into one long stretch of grey-blue hours and blacked-out nights, punctuated only by bowls of hot water, the occasional scream of the wind, and the creak of your own bones when you try to stand. But today something feels different. It starts when Astrid puts on a mask. Not a real mask. Not something ornate or ceremonial. It's made from bark and bits of dyed wool, strung together with sinew, and painted with streaks of ash and berry. She ties it behind her head with a blank expression like this is the most normal thing in the world. You look around, expecting someone to react, but no one flinches, not even the boy. He's already cutting holes in a piece of boiled leather. Trying to make his own, it's midwinter. You didn't even know there was a name for it here, but apparently there is. The dead centre. The longest stretch of dark. The moment where the sun has been gone just long enough to forget, and the first promise of return still feels like a cruel joke. The people here don't celebrate it like a party. No wine, no music, not even extra food. They mark it like a scar, a ritual, a dare to the dark. Leaf paints lands under his eyes with soot. The widow burns juniper again, thicker than usual. The smoke turns the air inside the longhouse to fog. The boy laughs and spins in circles, arms outstretched like he's pretending to fly. He trips and falls into a pile of straw, giggling. Then he's serious again. That's how it goes now. Joy arrives in flashes and disappears just as fast. You ask Astrid why the masks. She shrugs. To confuse the spirits. They come closest now when the night is deepest. If they don't recognise us, they won't follow us home. You're not sure if she's joking. Here's your historical marker for this madness. Midwinter rites were real. Ancient Norse people observed Jule or Yule, a time of feasting, toasts, and fire meant to push back the darkness. But beneath the celebration there were layers of fear and ritual. People wore masks to ward off spirits. Sometimes they blackened their faces with ash. Some even walked backward out their doors at night to confuse ghosts watching through windows. And here's your fringe fact for the night. One fringe belief found in obscure Icelandic sagas tells of a creature called the Modhunna, the mood hound, said to wander through towns in midwinter, sniffing for sorrow. If it found a house too quiet, too hopeless, it would crawl inside through the smoke hole and sit by the fire until everyone inside stopped dreaming. You'd wake up empty, grey, alive, but not living. Which might explain why Leif tells a story after dinner. It's not a good story here. It's not even a coherent one. Just something about two brothers who built a boat from driftwood, tied it together with their own hair, and tried to sail it across a frozen lake. They made it halfway, he says, then shrugs. Ice cracked. That was that. You stare, waiting for a punchline. There isn't one. The boy claps anyway. Then the widow starts singing. It's not a song you know, not even a tune, really. Just a low, droning chant. The words are ancient. Scraped from the old language like wind etching runes into stone. You don't understand them, but your skin prickles as she sings. Astrid joins in. Leif hums along. Even the goat bleats once, like it wants to be part of whatever this is. They chant until the fire seems to pulse in rhythm, until the masks on their faces start to look less like disguises and more like warnings, till the air feels thick with something. You watch, transfixed, as the shadows on the walls ripple like cloth in windless air. And then everything stops. Dead silence. Even the fire seems to freeze. The door creaks, just a little. No wind, no footsteps, just the slow, unmistakable sound of something wooden moving against its hinges. Leif is up before you can speak, axe in hand. Astrid grabs the boy and pulls him close. The widow reaches into the fire and pulls out a blackened stick, still glowing red at the tip. She walks to the door and presses it shut. No panic, no rush, just one firm, deliberate motion. Then she draws a symbol across it in soot and ash. An eye. You don't sleep that night. None of you do. You sit in your masks, faces blank, watching the fire as it burns low and then rises again with the fresh logs. You hum songs with no words. You tell stories with no endings. You pretend not to hear the soft scratching outside. The boy whispers, "It's just the spirits playing." Astrid shushes him gently. No names. You lie back, eyes wide open. Mask still tied to your face. It's the first time you've ever felt like maybe you're part of the ritual now. Not just watching from the outside, you're inside the story. Inside the circle. Inside the dark. And in that moment, it doesn't feel entirely real anymore. Or maybe it feels more real. Like the masks are the truth, and the faces underneath are just what you wear to survive. Here's your final bit of Viking wisdom for the night. They believed that during the darkest part of the year, the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, not gone, just thinner, enough to see through, enough for things to step through. The rituals weren't for celebration, they were camouflage, armour, a warning to whatever walked the snow. You sleep with your mask on, just in case. You wake to the smell of something sweet. Not cloying, not rich, just not rotten, which is such a wild novelty at this point that you sit up too fast and immediately regret it, because your spine cracks like a frozen log, but you lean into it. That smell. It's faint, but real. Smoke, pine, and something faintly burnt but sugary. You sniff like a bloodhound, and your brain can barely process the idea. Honey, or something close enough. Astrid catches your look and grins. Dried apples. Found some under the goat shed, wrapped in birch bark, probably forgotten. She's grating them into the porridge like she's crafting treasure. Kipur. You blink. Dried fruit dorso. Hidden like contraband, the closest thing to luxury you've seen in weeks. Leaf mutters. Would have made a good bribe for the gods. Then, after a pause, too late now. The widow says nothing, just stirs the pot with slow reverence, like she's officiating a marriage between oats and miracles. Even the boy is reverent this morning. He sits at the hearth, hair a disaster, chewing on a piece of moss and looking unusually thoughtful. It smells like before, he says softly. Like autumn. And there it is, the Shifud. A change in the air you can't quite name. You haven't seen the sun, the snow hasn't stopped. But something feels different, lighter, like the dark has loosened its grip just enough to let you breathe again. Here's your historical reality. Signs of seasonal shift weren't always obvious. There were no calendars hanging from the longhouse wall, no meteorologist to offer a 7-day forecast. Vikings relied on subtleties, slightly longer light at midday, a change in wind direction, the way snow melted around tree roots before anywhere else. These signs were studied like scripture. Misread them, and you might plant too soon or wait too long, or walk into a storm thinking it was over. And here's your fringe fact. In some Norse settlements, mid-February was marked with a ritual called Veterneta, Winter Nights, a quiet celebration that winter's peak had passed. It wasn't about feasting, it was about surviving long enough to notice the change. Families might burn a piece of last year's harvest or release a caged animal if they had one left. Some just opened their doors and shouted into the dark, "We're still here!" You feel like shouting that now, but instead you eat apple porridge with your fingers because no one wants to share their one clean spoon, and you savour every bite like it's a farewell to frostbite. Even the goat seems smug, like it knows something's turning. The afternoon is clear. No snow. Just thick grey sky and the occasional sigh of wind. Leaf decides it's a good day to dig out the old path to the stream. It's not far, maybe 30 paces, but right now it's buried under waist-high drifts. You offer to help. He grunts approval. It takes hours. Your fingers go numb, then they hurt. Then they go numb again, which is worse, but the motion is oddly satisfying. Shovel, stomp, clear. You keep catching glimpses of brown beneath the snow, tree roots, old stones, something that might be a forgotten shoe. You don't ask. When you reach the stream, it's still mostly frozen, but there's water moving beneath the crust, barely visible through a hairline crack. Leif stares at it for a long time. "That's enough," he says. "That's all we need." You fill a bucket. It's heavy, but warm in its own way. The idea of running water. You carry it back like it's sacred, like it's proof the earth hasn't died under the ice. Astrid greets you like you've returned from war. "You found it," she asks, breathless. You just nod. She dips her hands into the bucket, laughing, and here's your scholarly debate for today. Did Viking-era communities understand seasonal affective disorder? Of course not by name, but many historians argue that their rituals and daily structures evolved specifically to combat the mental toll of prolonged winter. Routine, group chores, fireside gatherings, songs, rituals, storytelling. It wasn't just tradition, it was treatment. Others argue that these behaviours were just incidental, but when you live it, you realise there's nothing accidental about survival. That night the widow prepares something strange. She pulls out a pouch you haven't seen before. Inside, seeds, tiny, dry, crumbling. She sifts through them like an old gambler counting chips. Then she sets a few gently into a bowl of warm water and places it by the fire. Why, you ask? So they remember what heat feels like, she answers, and that's it. Astrid adds, she's waking the harvest. The boy claps once softly. The sleeping seed, he whispers. You watch the bowl of soaked seeds like it's going to sprout in front of you, miracle style. It doesn't, of course, but you swear the water stirs just a little. Maybe it's the heat, maybe it's hope. The night is calm, too calm. You expect the scratching to return, the wind, the wolves, the heavy silence. But nothing comes, just fire, just slow breathing, just peace gone. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, you sleep the full night through. And when you wake, light, not much, just a soft bloom through the gap in the shutters, a warmer shade of grey, but it's there. You sit up slowly, stunned, and the boy is already at your side, eyes wide. Did you see it? He asks. You nod. He smiles. Spring is listening. And for once, you believe him. It starts as a rumour, whispered like a prayer across the breakfast fire. Someone saw a raven. Astrid is the one who says it first, almost casually, like she's testing the words. They saw one by the fjord, she murmurs, not even looking up from the root she's peeling, just sitting on a rock, preening. Leif makes a low sound in his throat. Not quite agreement, not quite disbelief. The widow doesn't speak at all, but her hands pause for a second before resuming their slow work with the spoon. The boy, though, gasps like he's just heard the gods are throwing a festival in the woods. A raven, he says, eyes wide. Then it's true. You ask the obvious question. What's true? They all look at you, then at each other. Then Astrid shrugs and says, the thaw's beginning. You blink. Outside it's still snowing, lightly sure, but it's there, soft flakes drifting past the window, quiet as breath. The trees are still white, the path still buried, the air still cold enough to bite your lungs raw. But that's not what matters now. It's not about what you see, and it's about what you hear, or smell, or feel, and according to the people around you, the raven knows. The raven sees it coming. Here's your historical anchor. Vikings watched animals for seasonal signs. Ravens especially were considered messengers, sometimes of Odin, sometimes of fate itself. If a raven lingered in winter, it meant something was shifting. They weren't migratory like some birds, but they disappeared during the deepest cold, only returning when the land began to wake. So yes, in a world without thermometers, ravens were basically the Norse version of a weather app. And here's your fringe fact for the day. There's an old belief, mostly found in remote Icelandic villages, that if you see a raven tilt its head 3 times in your direction before flying off, you've been marked by a vetir, a land spirit. Marked for what? No one quite agrees. Some say protection, others say responsibility, a few say mischief. All you know is if you see a raven now, you'll probably salute it just to be safe. Of course, Leif isn't impressed. One raven doesn't mean the snow's gone, he mutters, yanking a half-frozen log from the pile. Could have just been lost. But the boy won't let it go. He hums all day, bouncing between chores, peeking out the window every 10 minutes like the raven might land on his head and crown him king of spring. And honestly, you don't blame him. The air does feel different. Not warmer exactly, but looser somehow. Like the frost is no longer clenching its fists. The snow still falls, but it doesn't stick the same way. When you step outside to gather wood, your boots sink less. The ice creaks instead of cracking. And the sky, flat and colourless for so long, has finally started showing edges, layers. A smear of silver in the east that might, possibly, maybe be the beginning of light. That night, after the stew, which contains, against all odds, a chunk of something that might have once been cheese, Leif tells a story, not one of the creepy kind, not about wolves or draugr or the ice spirits that follow footprints. This one's different. A man once went out during the first thaw, he says, sitting by the fire with his eyes half closed, just to stretch his legs. Sun had touched the tops of the trees that morning and the stream had cracked through its ice skin. He thought, winter's gone, and walked into the woods wearing only one layer. You already see where this is going. He didn't come back, Leif continues, and when they found him days later he was frozen to a tree, pants down, thought he could relieve himself and froze mid-gesture. The boy howls with laughter. Astrid shakes her head, grinning. Moral of the story, never trust the first thaw. You laugh too, but it sticks a little in your throat. Because even now, even with the faintest signs of change, there's danger in letting your guard down. You've seen what happens to people who get too comfortable too soon, so you don't let yourself believe it's over. Not yet. You help Leif check the animal traps near the woods. There are prints now, barely visible but real. Not human, not wolf, something in between, maybe a fox, maybe something less friendly. You follow the path until you reach a mound of half-frozen snow, brush it aside, and find a rabbit. Small, stiff, but not rotted. You bring it back like a trophy. Astrid skins it in record time. Meat twice in 1 week, she mutters. Must be Yule again. The widow sets the bones aside carefully. She's been saving bones for weeks now, storing them in a cloth bundle near the fire. You thought it was superstition, but today she explains. We bury them together in spring, she says. Give thanks, say goodbye. You realise this is her version of a census, a ledger of survival, each bone a line in the storyboard. And here's your scholarly dilemma for the day. Were these rituals religious, symbolic, or just psychological crutch? Hard to say. There's little written proof. Most of it comes from oral tradition and fragments. But when you're living it, when you've been buried under ice and fear and exhaustion for this long, you don't need footnotes. You understand instinctively why a bone becomes sacred, why a raven becomes a prophet. That night you hear the stream again. Faint, trickling, but moving. You step outside in your boots and too thin cloak, standing still at the edge of the woods. The sky's clearer now, not much, just a crack between clouds, revealing the pale smudge of moonlight. You feel something shift in your chest. It's not joy, but it's close. Behind you the boy whispers, "Do you hear it?" You nod. "I think it's coming," he says. "What is?" He smiles, showing one missing tooth and one dirt-smudged cheek. "Spring." And you almost believe him. Almost. You wake to birdsong. For a full minute, you're not even sure what it is. A sound so alien, so jarringly delicate that your half-conscious brain panics and assumes something has broken. Maybe the fire pit or your own hearing. But then you hear it again, a trill, mud and hollow, somewhere near the longhouse roof. The boy bolts upright from the furs, already wide-eyed. "Skvida," he whispers, the old word for bird call. Astrid sits up, mouth slightly open as if afraid to break the moment. Even Leif freezes with his hand halfway to his boots. You all stare at the ceiling like you expect it to lift off. And then, as if on cue, the light changes. Just a little. Just enough. When you crack the door open, carefully, expecting to see another week's worth of snowdrifts, you're greeted instead by a landscape that's still buried. Yes, still white and brutal and frozen, but the edges have softened, the snowbanks have slumped, the path no longer fights your boots with each step. And more than that, there's water. Trickling, melting, seeping through the seams of the world like it's decided to take its power back. Astrid steps out next to you and gasps. "Look," she says, pointing. At first you don't see it. Then there, a patch of dirt. Actual dirt. Brown, real, ugly as sin and beautiful as salvation. The first patch of ground you've seen in what feels like a lifetime. The boy rushes forward and drops to his knees. He presses his hands to the mud, smearing it across his fingers like it's war paint. Then he laughs, loudly, purely. The sound cuts through the air like a torch through fog. Here's your historical context. In Viking societies, the moment the ground reappeared wasn't just noticed, it was celebrated. Families mark the first thaw as a sacred moment, sometimes quietly with offerings, sometimes with feasts, if there was anything left to feast on, but always with intention. The land had survived. So had they. One particularly quirky tradition involved pressing a stone, warmed by the hearth, into the first patch of soil as a blessing, not to wake the earth, but to greet it. To say, "You've returned, and we're still here." And here's your fringe fact. Some Norse clans believe the land itself had to be reintroduced to human touch after winter. Children would walk barefoot across newly thawed ground to soften it with life. Obviously, this sometimes resulted in frostbite. But the act was symbolic. A reminder that the land and the people were in a kind of relationship, icy, estranged lovers slowly reconciling. You watch the boy smear a streak of mud across his cheek and you get it. You really do. Inside, the widow sets a pot of water on the fire. Not for stew, not for tea, but for washing. You all take turns scrubbing your faces and hands, watching weeks of smoke, soot and misery dissolve into the bowl. It's not much, but it's the closest thing to a spa day you'll get in Viking hell. And that smell, it's not from the water. It's outside, wet earth. It hits you like an old friend, muddy and musky and full of hidden promise, the smell of rot and rebirth tangled together in one ancient handshake. You can't stop inhaling it. It fills your lungs like memory. You help Leif with the traps that afternoon. Not because he asks, but because you need to move to do. The sun doesn't show itself fully, but its presence is implied. The wind still bites, but it's more bark than teeth. You check the snare lines near the tree line and find 2 rabbits. Small, scrappy survivors. Leif holds one up and mutters, "Even the prey is brave now." Astrid stays behind, scraping old hides and checking what's left of the dried herbs. The boy is supposed to help her, but you spot him near the barn, crouching low over something. You approach slowly. He's whispering to a clump of green. Actual green. It's just moss, soft and curling out from beneath a rock, but it's alive, not dormant. Not frostbitten. You kneel beside him and whisper, "What's her name?" He doesn't even blink. "Helga," he says. "She came back." You both sit in silence for a while, watching Helga the moss soak in the weak light like she's sunbathing. And for a minute, the world is almost okay. Back inside, the mood has shifted. There's still no feast, supplies are too low, but Astrid makes something resembling a cake from crushed roots and rendered fat, and no one complains. The boy insists Helga gets a pinch of it, and the widow allows it. "Spring needs feeding too," she says. That night, you all gather by the fire, not because you're afraid, but because you want to. There's no scratching at the door, no howling wind, just warmth, and the slow stretch of relief uncoiling in your chest like a thawed snake. Leif finally tells the story of how he lost his thumb tip. Spoiler, it involves a pig, 2 beers, and a dare involving a frozen gate latch. Astrid laughs so hard she snorts. The widow actually smiles. The boy falls asleep mid-laugh, his head in your lap. You let yourself believe just a little that you might survive this. Here's your scholarly debate for the night. Did people in the Viking Age really mark the end of winter with ritual? Or did they just cling to survival and happen to be relieved when it got easier? Some argue that the rituals were exaggerated in later retellings. Others say they were central to the Norse worldview. Proof that nature could be harsh but not cruel, that if you endured long enough the world would offer you a soft place to land. You fall asleep with the boy's weight against you and the fire at your back. And when you dream, it's not of snow or wolves or things clawing at the walls. It's of running water and green things sprouting in secret places and laughter echoing through trees that no longer hold their breath. You wake up smiling. And that's new. It's hard to believe, but you're sweating. Not pouring sweat, not the kind that drips down your back or soaks your shirt like high summer, but it's there, dampening the collar of your tunic, warming the creases of your arms, blooming under your knees. The kind of sweat that comes from movement in air that no longer hates you. You strip off your outer cloak and hang it on a peg by the door, and no one calls you reckless. Astrid even cracks the door open without checking for wolves first. You nearly faint from the audacity. Outside, the world is dripping. You've never been so grateful for mud in your life. The yard has turned to a churned mess of snowmelt and hoofprints, half-rotted straw and thawing earth. The goat stands ankle-deep in it, looking confused and somewhat offended. Patches of brown are overtaking white like an army reclaiming its homeland. Trees weep silently, their branches shedding beads of ice like old jewellery. Water runs down from the thatched roof in rivulets, forming puddles at the base of the longhouse walls. Spring has arrived like a feral thing. Not graceful, not beautiful, but loud and alive. The boy runs barefoot through the muck, squealing with joy, his legs caked in mud to the knees. Astrid tries to chase him down to wipe his feet, but gives up halfway through and just laughs. Leif stands at the corner of the longhouse with a shovel and an expression halfway between satisfaction and deep suspicion. "She'll trick us," he mutters. "Always does. One false thaw, one last frost." But even he can't deny it. The sun is back. A real sun this time. Pale, yes, weak, but persistent. It peeks through the clouds like a shy guest returning to a party it left too early. You blink up at it until your eyes water. It feels unreal. Here's your historical context to frame the joy. Early spring in Norse lands was less a celebration and more a cautious reawakening. Winter didn't end so much as retreat, grudgingly in stages, like a king who knows he's lost but wants to keep his dignity. People didn't throw off their cloaks and dance in flower fields. They crept. They tested the air. They listened to the ground. There were rituals, yes, but they were often for protection, not just thanks. And here's your delightfully weird fringe fact. Some Norse farmers placed animal bones in the melting snow as a sacrifice to Skadi, the goddess of winter and the mountains, not to praise her, but to pay her to leave. It was like saying, "Thanks for the suffering, now kindly piss off." Others made offerings to Freya, god of fertility and growth, bearing seeds in sacred patterns to coax him back from wherever he'd been sulking for the last 3 months. Astrid makes her own offering that afternoon. You watch her slice a piece of dried root, precious stuff, and wrap it in a rag. She ties it with sinew and tucks it into the crook of the oldest tree near the goat pen. When you ask why, she simply says, "To remind the earth we didn't give up." The widow is outside too, for the first time in weeks. She moves slowly but with purpose. She walks the edge of the house, murmuring under her breath, and scatters ash in a line along the base of the wall. When you ask what she's doing, she replies without looking up, "Cleansing the threshold, in case anything unwanted came in with the thaw." You don't laugh, not anymore. Later, Leif hauls out the sled, the same one that nearly fell apart under a load of frozen firewood back in January. He inspects it like it's a wounded friend. "We'll need it for planting," he says, "soon as the soil breaks." That word, planting, feels like a Zbelly. Foreign, beautiful, you haven't thought of it in so long. It hits you hard, and suddenly, you've made it. Not out of danger entirely, not to some grand ending, but through the worst of it. You want to cry, but your body's too dry, so you laugh instead. That night you eat something that could actually be called a meal. Real broth thick with rabbit and wild onion. Flatbread with salt and lard, even a thin ale that's been fermenting since midwinter. The boy insists on a toast. "To Helga the Moss," he shouts, raising a wooden spoon. Everyone joins in. "To Helga." And then, a beat later, "To Spring." And it echoes around the room like a song. Here's your final scholarly debate to round things off. Was survival in the Viking world more about physical endurance or mental adaptability? Some historians argue it was raw strength and knowledge of the land. Others claim it was community, ritual, shared belief systems that made it possible. But maybe, just maybe, it was hope. Not the warm, fluffy kind, the sharp, defiant kind. The kind that keeps you upright when the world has nothing left to give. That night, no one wears a mask. No one listens for footsteps on the roof or claws at the door. The fire burns low, not out of fear, but because no one is cold. You fall asleep listening to the drip, drip, drip of meltwater outside, like a slow drumbeat welcoming you back to the world. In your dream, the longhouse doors are wide open, the snow is gone, and something green is waiting. And just like that, it's over. Not winter, not completely. There are still patches of snow clinging to the north sides of rocks, still mornings when your breath hangs thick in the air, and nights when frost crawls across the doorframe like it doesn't quite realise the season has changed. But the siege has ended. The long, endless, soul-swallowing war against the dark has broken, and the survivors, you included, are still standing. You've stopped checking the corners for shadows that whisper. The goat is fattening again. The boy has started climbing trees like he was born in their branches. Astrid sings now, real songs with words. Leif laughs without flinching. And the widow? She just watches it all, the way a tree watches a storm pass, quiet, rooted, alive. Your own hands look different now, harder, scarred in new places. The softness you once had, the one that came from microwaves and phone screens and heated blankets, is gone. But something else took its place. Call it grit, call it stubbornness. Or maybe just the understanding that being warm isn't something you can always expect. Sometimes you have to fight for it. One day, you find the boy crouched in the thawed field planting something. You ask what it is. "Hope," he says. You don't ask if he means a seed or an idea. It doesn't matter. Later that week, you help Astrid hang herbs from the rafters, tie bundles of early shoots with twine, dry strips of rabbit on a rack out by the fence. The work is rhythmic, almost peaceful. You sleep well now, not because you're unafraid, but because fear no longer owns you. It just visits sometimes, like weather. You still remember the worst nights, the silence, the hunger, the scratching. But they've become something else now. Not nightmares. Not quite. More like stories. And maybe, someday, you'll tell them around your own fire. Maybe you'll begin the same way Astrid did, with a smile and a warning. Let me tell you why you wouldn't survive a Viking winter, but you did, somehow. You did.